Introduction. Welcome to the human jungle. There is a moment in almost every adult life when the world stops looking like a lesson and starts looking like a negotiation. You discover that intelligence does not guarantee success. Kindness does not guarantee safety. Effort does not guarantee recognition. And good intentions do not guarantee good outcomes. None of this means life is hopeless. It means the environment has rules, and many of those rules are psychological. The human jungle is not simply a place where people compete. It is the network of incentives, relationships, expectations, reputations, emotions, scarce resources, opportunities, and uncertainties in which you have to make a life. Some people help you, some compete with you, some want something from you, some love you, some misunderstand you. And sometimes the same person will do several of those things depending on the situation. What makes the jungle difficult is that the rules are rarely announced. You learn them through consequences. You learn that a promise and a pattern are not the same thing. You learn that access to someone is not intimacy with them. You learn that being useful can make you valuable, but it can also make you convenient. You learn that urgency can make an intelligent person sign a terrible deal. You learn that power often belongs less to the loudest person than to the person with options. This book is a field guide for those moments. It is not a manual for manipulation, and it is not an argument for paranoia. It is an argument for awareness. You can be generous and still have boundaries. You can trust people and still pay attention to patterns. You can cooperate with others without pretending that incentives do not exist. The 30 rules are written as conversations rather than commands. I want you to recognize yourself in them. The version of you who stayed too long, trusted too quickly, said yes while wanting to say no, chased an opportunity because it looked impressive, or mistook attention for progress. The point is not to judge that person. The point is to learn from them. As you move through the book, you will notice a recurring idea. Freedom is usually built before it is needed. A person with savings can negotiate differently from a person who must accept the next paycheck. A person with multiple skills can leave a bad role more easily than someone whose entire identity is tied to one job. A person with strong boundaries can be kind without resentment, because kindness is a choice rather than a debt. You will also notice that many of the rules are less dramatic than they sound. The human jungle is not mostly made of villains. It is made of ordinary people responding to incentives, fears, ambitions, habits, and social signals. Understanding that makes the world less personal. Someone may reject you because of a constraint you cannot see. Someone may compete with you because the reward system encourages it. Someone may promise something they sincerely intend to deliver and still fail because intentions are weaker than patterns. That is why the book keeps returning to observation. Watch what repeats. Watch what changes when money enters the room. Watch what happens when you say no. Watch how people behave when they have power and when they lose it. Watch what happens after a promise is made. These details tell you more than slogans do. The goal is not to become suspicious of everything. It is to become difficult to surprise in predictable ways. You will still be shocked by some things. You will still make mistakes. But fewer of those mistakes need to come from illusions you could have questioned in advance. Success in a harsh world is not simply winning. It is remaining capable of choosing while other people, pressures, and circumstances are trying to choose for you. It is keeping your judgment when everyone is rushing. It is keeping your humanity without surrendering your boundaries. It is learning when to speak, when to wait, when to negotiate, and when to leave. That is the spirit of the 30 rules that follow. Take what is useful. Challenge what is too simple. And pay attention to the moments when a sentence makes you uncomfortable. Those are often the sentences worth examining most closely. Part 1. Seeing the world clearly. Rule 1. The world does not owe you fairness. Before you learn to get ahead, you have to stop asking reality to grade you according to your intentions. That sounds harsh because we are raised on a moral idea of fairness. Work hard, behave well, and things should eventually work out. It is a beautiful principle for teaching children how to live together. It is not a reliable description of how complex systems behave. You can do everything right and still lose an opportunity. Someone with less talent can arrive earlier. Someone with more money can take a longer risk. Someone with a better network can hear about the opening before you do. A business can fail because the market moved. A relationship can end because two people changed in different directions. None of this automatically means your effort was worthless. It means effort is one variable inside a much larger equation. The adult advantage comes when you stop treating unfairness as a personal insult and start treating it as information. A rejection can mean you need a stronger skill, a different strategy, better timing, a better presentation, or simply a different environment. Sometimes the answer is not to work harder. Sometimes it is to move to a game in which your strengths matter more. This is where realism becomes more empowering than resentment. Resentment asks why the world did not reward you the way you believe you deserved. Realism asks what the world is actually rewarding right now. That second question gives you something to work with. Look at professional life. Two people can put in similar hours and receive different outcomes because one is solving a more valuable problem, communicating the result more clearly, or operating in a market with stronger demand. Effort still matters, but effort without leverage can become a form of exhaustion. The world does not measure how tired you are. It responds to what your effort produces, how scarce it is, and what other people are willing to exchange for it. Personal relationships work the same way, although people dislike admitting it. Being a good person does not guarantee that everyone will like you. Being loyal does not guarantee that someone will stay. You can offer care sincerely and still discover that the other person wants a different life. The fair response is not to become colder. It is to stop using morality as a prediction machine. This rule is not permission to behave badly. It is permission to stop expecting goodness to function like insurance. Keep your standards, but remove the fantasy that standards control outcomes. When you do, disappointment becomes easier to process because it no longer needs to mean that reality has betrayed you. One of the strongest things you can do after an unfair outcome is ask 3 questions. What was outside my control? What was inside it? And what would I do differently if I had to face the same conditions again? The first question restores perspective. The second restores agency. The third turns pain into strategy. You will never eliminate randomness. You can, however, build a life that has more options when randomness turns against you. That is what maturity looks like in practice. Not expecting the jungle to become fair, but becoming more capable of moving through it. Once you accept this, you stop wasting energy demanding that every outcome validate your worth. You can be disappointed without becoming bitter. You can lose without turning the loss into an identity. And you can begin to play the actual game in front of you. There is a quiet psychological cost to expecting fairness from every system. You become personally offended by information that should instead help you make a better decision. If another candidate gets the promotion, you may spend weeks proving to yourself that the process was biased. If the market rejects a product you worked on for a year, you may defend the effort instead of examining demand. The disappointment is real, but the useful question is always larger than the emotion. What does this environment reward? And how can I respond without abandoning my standards? Fairness is still worth creating wherever you have influence. You can pay people properly, share credit, treat colleagues with dignity, and build relationships where reciprocity matters. But you cannot turn those values into a guarantee that every person or institution will return them. The world is not a vending machine into which you insert goodness and receive success. Mature people keep their ethics while giving up the fantasy of guaranteed outcomes. The strange freedom that comes from accepting this rule is that failure becomes less insulting. You can lose without deciding that you are cursed. You can watch someone less prepared succeed and still keep learning. You can recognize that luck helped you when it helped and hurt you when it hurt. Once you stop requiring reality to validate your self-image, you can work with reality as it is once you accept unequal outcomes. You can focus on leverage rather than grievance. Leverage might be better information, a stronger skill, a different market, a useful relationship, or simply the patience to wait for a better opening. This is not about becoming calculating in every human interaction. It is about noticing where reality gives you room to act instead of spending your entire emotional budget arguing with the rules. Fairness still matters because the way we treat people shapes the environments we create. The rule is about prediction, not morality. Create fairness where you can. Expect uncertainty where you cannot control it. Imagine two people receiving the same rejection. One spends 6 months building a story about injustice. The other takes a weekend to feel disappointed, then asks what the rejection reveals about the market, the position, or the timing. The second person is not necessarily more talented. They are simply converting the same event into information sooner. That difference compounds. The world does not become fairer because you complain about it, but your choices can become better because you study what happened. Over a decade, that habit of extracting information from unfair outcomes can create an enormous advantage. Rule 2. People reveal themselves through patterns, not promises. One of the easiest ways to misunderstand another person is to fall in love with a promise before you have observed a pattern. Words are cheap in the literal sense that they require very little energy. A promise can be sincere and still reveal almost nothing about what someone will do when the situation becomes inconvenient. You do not need to become cynical about promises. People make honest commitments every day. The problem is that sincerity in the moment is not the same as reliability over time. A person can fully mean what they say on Monday and still behave differently on Friday when pressure, temptation, fatigue, or opportunity changes the equation. Patterns are harder to fake because they require repetition. Watch how someone treats people who cannot help them. Watch whether they take responsibility when something goes wrong. Watch whether they remember agreements when there is no social reward for remembering. Watch what happens when you say no to them. Character becomes much easier to see when a person does not get exactly what they want. In professional life, this distinction can save you years. A colleague may talk constantly about collaboration, but the useful question is what they do when credit is available. A manager may say that work-life balance matters, but what happens when the team misses a target? A partner may say that honesty is important, but what happens when telling the truth costs them something? The same idea applies to you. If you want people to trust you, do not focus only on sounding trustworthy. Build a pattern of predictable behavior. Meet small commitments. Communicate early when you cannot. Admit mistakes before someone else has to discover them. Reliability is not a personality trait you announce. It is a reputation you accumulate. There is also a trap in overreading isolated behavior. Everyone has bad days. Everyone sometimes fails, forgets, reacts defensively, or makes a selfish choice. The goal is not perfection. It is consistency. Ask whether the behavior is an exception or a recurring structure. When you are deciding whether someone deserves more access to you, let time do some of the work. Trust can be generous without being immediate. Give people enough room to show you who they are, but do not give them unlimited access while you are still collecting evidence. This rule can feel slow in a culture that rewards instant intimacy. We message quickly, share quickly, collaborate quickly, and sometimes assume that emotional intensity is proof of connection. It is not. Time does not guarantee trust, but repeated behavior gives trust something to stand on. If someone wants you to ignore a pattern because of one beautiful explanation, pay attention. Explanations matter, but patterns matter more. A person who repeatedly repairs their mistakes is telling you something. A person who repeatedly creates the same problem and then offers the same explanation is telling you something too. In the end, you do not have to decide whether someone is good or bad. That question is usually too crude. Ask a better one. What pattern am I being asked to live with? That answer is often enough. Patterns are especially important when the stakes are high because people can perform for a surprisingly long time during short interactions. A first meeting rewards charm. A first date rewards attention. A job interview rewards preparation. What happens after the reward disappears is often more revealing. Watch the person after they get what they want. Watch what happens when the conversation is boring, when the problem is inconvenient, or when there is no audience to impress. You can make this principle practical without becoming a detective. Keep small promises yourself, and notice how others handle small commitments. Does someone correct an error without being chased? Do they return to an issue after the emotional moment has passed? Do they remember what mattered to you? These details do not make a complete personality profile, but over time they create a much more useful picture than declarations about character. And remember that patterns should be interpreted with generosity as well as caution. One missed deadline does not prove unreliability. One angry reaction does not prove cruelty. A good observer is not the person who collects evidence against everyone. A good observer is the person who allows repeated behavior to update their judgment without turning every exception into a verdict. If someone repeatedly tells you what you want to hear while behaving differently when the stakes rise, you already have enough information. You do not need a dramatic betrayal to justify adjusting your trust. Small inconsistencies, repeated over time, are often the quiet warning that a larger problem is coming. The best relationships are not built on perfect behavior. They are built on patterns of repair. People fail, notice, apologize, and change. That pattern can be more trustworthy than a person who never admits a mistake because they care more about looking reliable than becoming reliable. Think about hiring, friendship, or partnership decisions, where someone speaks beautifully about integrity. The words may be true. Still, you learn more when you watch how they handle a small inconvenience. Does the person return a borrowed item without being reminded? Do they keep an agreement when nobody will punish them for breaking it? Do they repair harm without turning the apology into an explanation of why they were justified? These are ordinary moments, but ordinary moments are where patterns live. Grand declarations are memorable. Repeated behavior is predictive. Rule 3. Never give unlimited access to people who have not earned trust. Access is one of the most underestimated forms of power in modern relationships. Your time, attention, private information, home, network, emotional energy, and professional credibility are all forms of access. Once you give them away, getting them back can be much harder than giving them away was. People sometimes think boundaries are a sign of distrust. Healthy boundaries are usually the opposite. They are a way of letting trust grow at a pace that reality can support. You do not need to assume someone will harm you in order to decide that they do not yet need every detail of your life. Think of access as a staircase rather than a door. Someone can know you casually without knowing your private struggles. They can work with you without controlling your schedule. They can be a friend without becoming your only emotional support. They can be close without having permission to ignore every boundary you set. This matters because people learn how to treat you from what you repeatedly allow. If every request receives an immediate yes, people do not experience you as generous. They may eventually experience you as endlessly available. That distinction matters. Generosity without boundaries can quietly turn into resentment. You will know a boundary is working when you can say no without needing to deliver a courtroom defense. You do not need to convince everyone that your limit is morally perfect. "I cannot do that" is sometimes complete information. Watch what happens after the no. Healthy people may be disappointed, but they adjust. Controlling people may punish, guilt, withdraw, threaten, or suddenly question your character. The reaction itself becomes information about the relationship. This principle also applies to professional access. You do not have to answer every message instantly. You do not have to give every client your private hours. You do not have to share every idea before it has been developed. Your availability is a resource. And resources need boundaries if they are going to remain valuable. The deeper lesson is that trust should be earned in layers. Let people show you how they handle small responsibilities before you hand them larger ones. Let them demonstrate respect before you give them more influence. Let them show discretion before you share sensitive information. You can still be warm. You can still be open. You can still welcome people into your life. The difference is that openness becomes a choice rather than a default. Your life does not become smaller when you create boundaries. It becomes easier to inhabit. Unlimited access often feels flattering at first. Someone wants your time, your advice, your attention, your home, or your private thoughts, and being needed can feel like proof that you matter. But access and respect can drift apart when the arrangement becomes one-sided. A person may love what you provide without developing the maturity required to care for you in return. One of the simplest tests is to notice whether access becomes a negotiation or an assumption. Healthy relationships contain adjustment. If someone expects instant replies because you used to answer instantly, the habit has become an entitlement. If a colleague treats your willingness to help as an automatic transfer of responsibility, the original favor has changed shape. You are allowed to renegotiate the terms of access as your circumstances change. Boundaries also protect the good in you. Without them, generous people often become bitter because every act of kindness begins to feel compulsory. The goal is to remain open while staying able to close the door when necessary. A boundary is not a wall around your personality. It is a gate with a person on the inside who gets to decide when it opens. A boundary should be clear enough that you can follow it yourself. If you say you will not answer work messages after a certain hour but keep doing it every night, you are teaching everyone, including yourself, that the boundary is theoretical. Consistency turns an idea into a limit. You will sometimes disappoint people by protecting your time. That is not evidence that you have become selfish. It is evidence that your life contains finite resources, and you have finally acknowledged the fact. Suppose a new acquaintance becomes intensely interested in your private life within a few days. They want your history, your vulnerabilities, your plans, your contacts, and your loyalty. You may interpret that intensity as connection. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is simply speed. There is nothing wrong with letting a relationship grow quickly when trust has real evidence underneath it. The important part is that you remain the person who decides what is shared next. Healthy closeness can survive gradual access. Unhealthy closeness often demands instant access as proof of affection. Rule 4. Envy is a signal, not a strategy. Envy is one of those emotions people prefer to hide because it makes the self-image uncomfortable. You see someone else succeeding and feel a tightening inside you. Their promotion bothers you. Their relationship bothers you. Their confidence, house, audience, body, money, freedom, or talent seems to shine a light on something you believe is missing from your own life. The mistake is not feeling envy. The mistake is refusing to learn from it. Envy can be crude information about desire. It tells you that some part of you is paying attention. That does not mean the object of envy is actually what you need. Social comparison is notorious for making visible outcomes look like complete lives. You see the title, not the stress. The audience, not the private uncertainty. The polished image, not the cost. You compare your full reality with someone else's selected evidence. So when envy appears, slow the emotion down. Ask what exactly you want. Is it the money or the autonomy the money seems to buy? Is it the public recognition or the feeling of being respected? Is it the relationship itself or the sense of belonging you imagine behind it? Once you identify the underlying desire, you can turn envy into a plan. If you envy someone's skills, learn. If you envy their freedom, examine what structures create it. If you envy their network, build relationships instead of resenting the fact that they have them. Comparison becomes dangerous when it becomes an accountant that never closes the books. There will always be someone ahead of you in one visible category. If your emotional stability depends on being the most successful person in the room will eventually defeat you. There is also a moral difference between wanting a better life and wanting someone else to lose theirs. The first can fuel growth. The second consumes energy without creating capability. Use envy as a question. What is this emotion pointing toward? Then let evidence decide whether the desire is worth pursuing. Sometimes you will discover that the thing you wanted was an illusion. Other times you will discover a genuine ambition that you had been avoiding. The important shift is from comparison to construction. You cannot control who appears richer, smarter, happier, or more admired. You can control whether the emotion becomes an excuse or a source of information. Envy becomes useful the moment you stop asking, "Why do they have it?" and start asking, "What does this reveal about what I value?" Envy becomes particularly destructive when you treat another person's visible result as evidence about your own worth. Someone else's success says very little about your capacity until you understand the context. Their timing, resources, market, family background, network, personality, and preferences may be entirely different from yours. Comparison strips away those variables and then asks you to judge yourself using the distorted remainder. When envy appears repeatedly around one theme, take that repetition seriously. Maybe you are not jealous of the person at all. Maybe you are responding to an unlived part of yourself. If freedom keeps triggering you, perhaps autonomy matters more than you admitted. If recognition keeps irritating you, perhaps you have a legitimate desire to have your work seen. The emotion can become useful once you translate it into a clear need. But not every desire deserves pursuit. Sometimes envy points toward a goal that would cost more than it gives. You may discover that the glamorous life you imagined requires a trade-off you do not actually want. That is valuable knowledge too. Envy does not have to end with acquisition. It can end with clarification. You can even use envy as a research tool. Study what the person actually did rather than the image that triggers you. You may discover a strategy worth learning, a sacrifice worth avoiding, or a path that is simply incompatible with the life you want. The important thing is to leave the comparison with more information than you had before. If all you gain is resentment, the emotion has collected interest without producing an asset. You may notice envy when a colleague receives an opportunity you wanted. The first thought is often about them. They are lucky, connected, overrated, favored. But the more useful question is about you. What outcome did I want and why? Perhaps the real desire is autonomy. Perhaps it is recognition. Perhaps it is financial stability. Once the desire is named, the emotion becomes less foggy. You can then decide whether to build the relevant capability, pursue a different route, or deliberately stop chasing something that looked attractive only because someone else possessed it. Rule 5. Be useful before you demand to be important. People often want recognition before they have created enough value to sustain it. They want the title, the audience, the authority, the invitation, or the respect. Wanting these things is normal. The problem comes when status becomes the goal and usefulness becomes an afterthought. In almost every environment, useful people become important eventually. Not always famous, not always admired, but important in the sense that others notice when they are absent. Usefulness is not the same as being endlessly available. That is a crucial distinction. A person who solves problems, communicates clearly, prevents mistakes, connects people intelligently, or creates something valuable is different from a person who simply says yes to everything. One creates leverage. The other creates dependency without necessarily increasing value. Look at the beginning of a career. You may not have the title you want. You may not have decision-making authority, but you can still become the person who makes the team better. Learn the system. Understand the bottlenecks. Become reliable when the pressure rises. Solve problems before announcing that you deserve more status. This principle also protects you from the emotional trap of being overlooked. Recognition often lags behind value. If you need constant applause to continue working, the environment can manipulate your motivation. Build competence that remains real even when nobody claps. There is another side to this rule. Do not let usefulness become your only identity. Some people become indispensable by absorbing every responsibility, and then wonder why they are exhausted. The goal is not to become impossible to function without. It is to become highly capable while keeping boundaries and developing others. When you become useful, you gain something more durable than compliments: bargaining power. You can ask for better terms because replacing the result you produce is difficult. That is a much stronger foundation for negotiation than simply insisting that you deserve recognition. Therefore, when you enter a new environment, ask a practical question. What problem can I become unusually good at solving? Then solve it consistently. Make the value visible without making yourself theatrical. Importance built on ego is fragile. Importance built on contribution is harder to remove. You do not need to become the loudest person in the room. Become the person whose absence changes the room. Usefulness also changes how you see your own progress. Instead of asking whether people notice you yet, ask whether you are becoming easier to trust and harder to replace. Have you learned how the system really works? Can you solve problems without creating new ones? Can you communicate a difficult idea so another person can act on it? These questions produce measurable growth even when recognition is delayed. In teams, useful people also multiply themselves. They document processes, teach others, improve systems, and prevent recurring mistakes. That is different from becoming indispensable through chaos. If everything collapses without you, you may be important, but you may also be trapped. The stronger form of usefulness is to create capability around you while continuing to grow beyond the role. There is a humility in this approach that is worth protecting. You do not have to enter every room demanding to be seen. Sometimes the fastest path to influence is to become the person who quietly makes difficult things work. Status that arrives as a consequence of value tends to feel more stable, because it is supported by reality rather than performance. There is a difference between asking for influence and preparing for influence. Preparation means becoming competent enough that greater responsibility will not crush you when it arrives. Build the judgment before the title. When recognition finally comes, let it be evidence of contribution rather than the source of your identity. That makes success easier to enjoy and easier to survive when the next chapter changes. A young professional can spend years trying to sound senior while avoiding the less glamorous work that actually produces senior judgment. The person who studies the problem, takes notes, improves the process, and becomes calm. Under pressure is often accumulating a form of influence that cannot be created by a title alone. When the opportunity for leadership appears, others already know who they trust. This is why useful behavior is often more strategic than visible ambition. Ambition wants the room. Usefulness gives the room a reason to remember you. Rule 6. Your reputation lives in other people's memory. Your reputation is the version of you that exists when you are not present. That makes it powerful and frustrating because you do not fully control it. You can explain yourself, clarify your intentions, and defend your choices. But people remember patterns through their own filters. A reputation is not a marketing slogan. It is accumulated memory. People remember whether you delivered when it mattered. They remember whether you became defensive when challenged. They remember whether you shared credit, whether you kept confidence, whether your mood controlled the room, and whether your promises became actions. This is why small acts matter more than people expect. A single dramatic gesture can impress someone. Repeated behavior is what creates trust. Over time, the details become shorthand. She always follows through. He disappears when things get difficult. You can tell him anything. Do not rely on her promises. These sentences are reputational summaries built from many observations. The good news is that reputation can be repaired, although not instantly. Consistency can update memory. A long enough pattern of different behavior can eventually become the new story. But you should not expect one apology to erase months or years of evidence. This is also why public behavior and private behavior both matter. You may be able to perform professionalism when everyone is watching, but your closest collaborators eventually notice how you behave when no reward is visible. Your reputation follows you between rooms. In connected professional environments, people often communicate. Opportunities can arrive through people who never met you directly, but heard about your work from someone they trust. That makes reputation an asset, but also a responsibility. Do not build one based on exaggeration. You do not want to become famous for something you cannot consistently deliver. A reputation that promises too much creates pressure and eventually collapses under its own weight. A healthier strategy is to make your reputation slightly boring in the best possible way. Be known for doing certain things well. Be known for returning calls, telling the truth early, protecting confidential information, meeting deadlines, or staying calm when the situation gets complicated. People do not need a perfect person. They need a predictable one. At the end of the day, your reputation is simply the memory other people carry of what it was like to deal with you. Treat that memory as something you are writing every day. Reputation also contains an important asymmetry. You experience your intentions, but other people experience your behavior. You know that you meant well. They only know what happened to them. That can feel unfair, yet it is useful to remember. If your intention and your reputation repeatedly diverge, the answer is not always to explain your intention more forcefully. Sometimes the behavior needs to change. You can also repair reputation by narrating mistakes without turning the apology into self-defense. "I was wrong about that" is stronger than a paragraph explaining why you were almost right. People often trust a person who can absorb correction because accountability lowers uncertainty. They know what will happen when the next mistake arrives. The person is likely to deal with it rather than hide it. Your reputational capital grows in boring moments. The person who keeps confidential information confidential, who gives credit when nobody is checking, who warns others early about bad news, and who does not create drama to make ordinary work look impressive, is quietly building an asset that becomes visible when an important opportunity appears. If your reputation feels unfair, resist the temptation to manage every conversation about you. You will never control the entire network of stories. What you can control is the evidence you continue creating. Over time, repeated behavior is difficult to argue with. A strong reputation also includes the courage to be human. People can trust someone who makes mistakes if they know the mistakes will be handled honestly. Perfection creates distance. Accountability creates confidence. Consider how quickly people form a shorthand for a colleague. She is reliable. He is brilliant but unpredictable. They always take responsibility. These summaries are created without formal evaluation. They emerge from accumulated interactions. Your reputation is therefore being updated when you think nothing important is happening. A tiny promise kept today may become part of how someone describes you 6 months later. A dismissive response may also survive longer than you expect. Reputation is built in moments too small to notice and then becomes powerful in moments too important to ignore. Part 2. Power, Boundaries, and Leverage. Rule 7. Learn to negotiate without apologizing for existing. Many people enter negotiations already apologizing in their body language. They soften every request, explain why they feel awkward asking, and make their own needs sound like an inconvenience. Then they wonder why the other side negotiates from strength. Negotiation is not a declaration that you are difficult. It is the process of finding terms that both sides can accept. A salary, contract, deadline, scope, price, or responsibility is not a moral test. It is an arrangement. You should still care about fairness. But fairness does not require you to make yourself smaller so someone else feels comfortable. If your work created value, discussing compensation is not greed. If a deadline is unrealistic, naming the constraint is not weakness. If a contract exposes you to unusual risk, asking for protection is not disrespect. The most effective negotiators tend to be clear rather than aggressive. They know what they want. They know what they can trade. They know what they will walk away from. And they do not confuse silence with failure. One reason people negotiate badly is that they become emotionally attached to being liked. The fear of being seen as demanding can be stronger than the cost of accepting poor terms. That is a dangerous trade. A short moment of discomfort can save months of resentment. Preparation changes everything. Before the conversation, determine your ideal outcome, your acceptable range, the value you bring, and the alternatives available to both sides. Ask questions before making concessions. Sometimes the other party is offering less simply because they assume you will accept it. You also need to understand that negotiation is not only about money. It can include flexibility, title, timing, autonomy, scope, support, credit, resources, and access. A good negotiation improves the overall arrangement rather than obsessing over one number. And remember that walking away is part of negotiating even when you hope you will not need to do it. If saying no is impossible, your yes has little negotiating value. The goal is not to dominate. It is to participate without disappearing. You are allowed to have needs. You are allowed to ask. You are allowed to pause before agreeing. Negotiation becomes healthier when you stop treating your own existence as something that requires an apology. Good negotiation begins before the conversation. Decide which parts of the deal matter most to you, where you have flexibility, and what you will do if the other side says no. Without that preparation, people often negotiate emotionally. They agree to something quickly because rejection feels painful, then spend months paying the cost of that moment. It is also useful to stop thinking of negotiation as a confrontation between two winners and losers. Many strong negotiations improve the information available to both sides. You may discover that the other person cares more about timing than price, or more about autonomy than title. Once you know that, you can trade intelligently instead of simply demanding more. The deepest shift is internal. You stop treating your own needs as an awkward interruption. You are not asking permission to exist. You are presenting the conditions under which you can participate well. A clear request can be respectful even when the answer is no. In fact, being able to hear no without collapsing is one of the foundations of mature negotiation. There are moments when the best negotiation is not to negotiate harder, but to improve your alternatives before negotiating at all. A weak offer looks different when you have another option waiting. Your strongest sentence may be calm rather than aggressive. That does not work for me. Never confuse discomfort with disrespect. A negotiation can feel uncomfortable because both sides are protecting something valuable. That is normal. The goal is not to remove tension, but to use it without becoming hostile. Imagine that you are offered a role with strong pay but an unrealistic workload. If you respond by apologizing for asking for adjustments, the conversation begins with the assumption that your needs are a burden. Instead, describe the work clearly. Ask what outcomes matter most. Ask which responsibilities can move, what support exists, and what the compensation reflects. You may still hear no, but you have transformed a vague feeling of discomfort into a professional conversation. That is the heart of negotiation, turning hidden assumptions into explicit terms that both sides can evaluate. Rule 8. Do not confuse kindness with permission. Kindness is a strength, but when kindness is never accompanied by boundaries, other people can begin to experience it as permission. This is how generous people become exhausted and then angry with people who never technically forced them to say yes. You may help because you care. Then you help again because you do not want to disappoint anyone. Eventually, the pattern becomes normal. The request arrives before you have considered whether you have the time, and you feel guilty for even asking the question. This is where kindness needs structure. A boundary does not cancel compassion. It makes compassion sustainable. You can care about someone and still refuse to take responsibility for their choices. You can help without becoming their emergency system. People learn from consequences. If you repeatedly rescue someone from every avoidable problem, you may unintentionally protect the behavior that creates the problem. That is not always kindness. Sometimes the more respectful act is to let another adult experience the natural result of their decision. You also need to watch the language of guilt. "After everything I have done for you," is often a sign that generosity has become a hidden contract. Healthy help does not quietly invoice the receiver later. At work, this distinction matters constantly. Being cooperative is valuable. Being the person who silently absorbs everyone else's unfinished tasks is not necessarily admirable. It can create a system in which other people learn that you will cover the gap. Try saying yes intentionally rather than automatically. Ask yourself whether you can help without creating a problem somewhere else. If you can, help. If you cannot, decline cleanly. There is no need to invent a dramatic excuse. You can say, "I cannot take that on this week," and still be a generous person. You can say, "I understand this matters to you, but I am not able to solve it for you." You can say, "I want to help, but this is the limit of what I can offer." People who respect you will eventually understand. People who benefit from the absence of your boundaries may object. Their objection does not prove the boundary is wrong. Kindness is strongest when it comes from choice. The moment it becomes compulsory, it stops feeling like kindness to both sides. There is another reason kindness needs boundaries. People can only learn your limits from your behavior. If you repeatedly rescue someone, they may sincerely conclude that rescue is part of the relationship. They do not necessarily wake up thinking, "I will exploit this person today." Habit does the work. Your pattern of availability becomes part of their expectation. You can change that pattern without making a dramatic announcement. Respond later. Offer a smaller form of help. Ask the other person what they have already tried. Let them solve one part of the problem themselves. Sometimes a healthier relationship emerges simply because the roles become more balanced. Kindness also includes kindness toward your future self. Every unnecessary commitment becomes a future obligation. Saying yes may feel generous today and exhausting 3 weeks from now. Sustainable generosity asks whether the help still makes sense when you count the hidden cost. That is not selfish arithmetic. It is what allows kindness to remain a choice. The healthiest relationships eventually reveal whether kindness can coexist with independence. Two adults should be able to care about one another without turning every request into a test of love. Sometimes the most generous thing you can offer is honesty about what you cannot do. False promises create a temporary feeling of kindness and a later experience of disappointment. A friend asks you for money again after repeatedly ignoring every previous attempt to change the situation. You feel guilty because you do not want to be cruel. Yet perhaps your kindness is now protecting a pattern rather than helping a person move through it. You can care about the friend while refusing to participate in the same cycle. Sometimes assistance means offering information, a contact, or a structured plan instead of repeating the rescue. The boundary is not a punishment. It is a way of making the relationship more honest. Rule 9. Power follows dependence. Power is often described as confidence, charisma, status, or personality. Those things can matter, but structure matters more than most people realize. The simplest version of the rule is this: the more one side depends on the other, the more leverage the less dependent side usually has. Imagine a freelancer who gets nearly all of their income from one client. The work may be excellent. The freelancer may be talented and respected, but structurally, the client has leverage because losing the relationship creates a crisis. Now imagine the same freelancer has several clients, a waiting list, and enough savings to survive a gap. The work has not changed. The freedom has. The same pattern appears in employment. If one company is your only source of income, your bargaining position can feel narrower. If you have portable skills and credible alternatives, the conversation changes. In relationships, the person who believes they cannot survive without the other may tolerate behavior they would never accept if they felt free to leave. This does not mean you should avoid dependence entirely. Human life is built on interdependence. Families, teams, friendships, and businesses all require people to rely on one another. The problem is dangerous dependence, a single point of failure that gives someone else disproportionate control over your choices. Build options before you need them. Develop skills that transfer between organizations. Maintain professional relationships without turning networking into manipulation. Save when you can. Keep your identity larger than one job title or one relationship. Create more than one route to opportunity. Power should also be handled responsibly. If someone depends on you, you have a choice. You can use that dependence to frighten, control, or humiliate them, or you can use your position to create trust, clarity, and mutual benefit. Fear can produce compliance quickly, but trust tends to produce stronger cooperation over time. Notice what happens when you have options. You become calmer. You do not need to prove that you can leave because you know you can. That changes your posture. It changes the kinds of deals you accept. It even changes how you speak. You do not need total independence. You need enough flexibility that one person, one client, one platform, or one mistake cannot dictate the shape of your whole life. The healthiest form of power is not the ability to trap someone else. It is the ability to choose without panic. When you build options, you are not preparing for betrayal, you are building resilience. Dependence becomes especially visible during negotiations because the side with fewer alternatives often behaves differently before a conversation even starts. They may apologize more, accept more uncertainty, or avoid asking difficult questions because the cost of losing the relationship feels too high. Building alternatives changes the emotional temperature before a single word is spoken. You can think of resilience as the systematic reduction of single points of failure. If one platform supplies your audience, learn how to communicate elsewhere. If one skill supports your income, develop a neighboring skill. If one relationship carries your entire emotional world, build a wider community. None of these actions guarantee security, but each reduces the amount of control concentrated in one place. There is a moral dimension here too. Power is safer when the person holding it has enough restraint to use it without humiliation. The fact that you can pressure someone does not mean you should. Durable influence is usually built by making cooperation attractive, not by making refusal frightening. Dependence can be economic, emotional, informational, or technological. A person may be dependent on one source of income, one relationship, one platform, or one gatekeeper. Each form deserves attention because each creates a different kind of vulnerability. The goal is not to stop needing anyone. It is to make sure that the loss of one relationship does not erase your ability to make choices. Interdependence becomes healthier when there is room for reciprocity and exit. A creator who depends entirely on one social platform can wake up one morning to discover that an algorithm changed and months of work no longer reach an audience. Nothing about the creator's talent changed overnight. The structure did. This is why dependence should be understood broadly. Your vulnerability may sit inside technology, money, a particular employer, a key customer, or even one person who controls access to a community. The lesson is not to distrust the system. It is to avoid allowing one system to hold the entire future hostage. Rule 10. Never let urgency steal your judgment. Urgency changes the mind. It narrows attention, increases emotional intensity, and makes immediate action feel more valuable than careful thought. Sometimes urgency is real. A medical emergency, a safety threat, or a genuine deadline may require speed. But many situations labeled urgent are simply designed to make you uncomfortable enough to stop asking questions. Salespeople know this. So do negotiators, managers, advertisers, and sometimes people who want something from you personally. Decide today. This is your last chance. If you really cared, you would answer now. The pressure works because uncertainty feels painful, and the promise of a quick decision seems like relief. The danger is not urgency itself. The danger is borrowed urgency. Someone else's timetable enters your nervous system, and suddenly you feel that their problem must become your emergency. One of the most useful habits in the jungle is learning how to slow the clock. Even a short pause can restore judgment. Ask what happens if you wait an hour. Ask what happens if you wait until tomorrow. Ask whether the deadline is externally fixed or socially created. When the decision involves money, reputation, contracts, or major commitments, create a rule for yourself in advance. Perhaps you never sign an unfamiliar agreement immediately. Perhaps you always sleep on purchases above a certain amount. Perhaps you require a second opinion before making a major career move. Pre-commitment matters because urgency weakens improvisational judgment. There is also an emotional form of urgency, the need to resolve a feeling. You want the argument settled tonight. You want reassurance now. You want the text answered immediately because waiting feels unbearable. Acting may calm the feeling temporarily while creating a larger problem. Later, try separating the need for relief from the need for resolution. You can be uncomfortable without solving everything immediately. A person who can tolerate a little uncertainty gains a major advantage. They can ask better questions while others are rushing. They can notice missing information. They can walk away from manufactured pressure. You will not always have the luxury of time. That is why the important decisions should be prepared before the crisis. Decide your standards while you are calm, not while you are desperate. When someone says, "You have to decide right now," your first thought should not be yes. It should be why. Urgency is persuasive partly because it changes the question. Instead of asking, "Is this a good decision?" you start asking, "How quickly can I make this decision?" The second question feels practical and urgent, but it silently removes the possibility that waiting is itself a useful choice. You can build a small resistance to this effect by separating deadlines into categories. Some are real because a system changes at a fixed time. Others are artificial because someone would simply prefer an answer sooner. Even when the deadline is real, there may be more options than the first person presenting the problem has told you. There is no prize for making an irreversible mistake quickly. Fast action matters when delay creates danger. Otherwise, speed should serve judgment rather than replace it. A calm pause can be one of the most expensive-looking things in a rushed room because it refuses to let everyone else's anxiety become your evidence. When you feel rushed, write the decision down in one sentence before doing anything. Seeing the actual choice often reveals that the emotional story around it is larger than the decision itself. If someone becomes angry because you want time to think, that reaction is information. Pressure often becomes visible the moment you stop cooperating with it. A common version of urgency appears in purchases. You see a limited time offer, imagine losing the discount. And suddenly the question is not whether you needed the item. The question becomes whether you can tolerate missing the chance. That is a psychological switch. Slow down and you often discover that the product has been available before. The deadline is artificial, or the cost matters more than the excitement. The same mechanism appears in career decisions and relationships. Urgency changes what feels important. A pause restores the original question. Rule 11. Build skills that travel. A skill is powerful when it remains valuable after the environment changes. Many people spend years becoming excellent at one narrow role without noticing how much of their value depends on a particular employer, system, or platform. When the environment shifts, their confidence shifts with it. Portable skills travel. Clear writing travels. Analytical thinking travels. Negotiation travels. Communication travels. Sales, project management, leadership, research, technical literacy, and the ability to learn quickly can survive changes in job title. This does not mean specialized expertise is bad. Deep specialization can be extremely valuable. The point is to build a core of abilities that can support you if the context disappears. Think of your career as a tree. One set of skills is the trunk, the abilities that form your professional identity. Branches are tools, industries, and specific roles. The stronger the trunk, the more freedom you have to grow in different directions. Portable skills also protect you psychologically. If your entire identity is tied to one position, losing that position feels like losing yourself. If you know you can learn, communicate, solve problems, and rebuild, the loss remains painful but becomes less existential, pays attention to what the market rewards repeatedly rather than what one organization happens to reward today. Ask people in different industries what they value. Look for overlapping skills. Build evidence that you can use those skills beyond your current setting. Another form of portability is relationships. Your network should not be only a list of people who can give you something. It should be a community of people who know what you are good at, what you care about, and how you work. You do not need to become a different person every year. You need to remain teachable enough that change does not erase your usefulness. The future will not ask whether you were loyal to one role. It will ask what you can still do when the old rules no longer apply. Build the skills that allow you to carry yourself into the next room. Portable skills create career optionality, but they also create intellectual independence. When you know how to learn, write, present, analyze, organize, negotiate, and solve problems, you are less dependent on one company teaching you what you are worth. You can enter a new environment and begin rebuilding value, even when the local rules are unfamiliar. One of the best ways to build portability is through projects rather than credentials alone. A certificate says you completed a learning process. A body of work shows that you can apply it. Build things, write analyses, create systems, solve practical problems, teach what you know. Evidence travels more easily than claims. Keep a record of the skills you are building and the situations in which they worked. This becomes a private map of your capability. When change arrives, you are not starting from zero. You are translating what you already know into a new context. A portable skill also gives you identity resilience. When one environment changes, you can still say, "I know how to learn this." That sentence is stronger than any job title because it describes a capacity rather than a position. Stay close to fundamentals. Tools become obsolete. The ability to understand problems, communicate, organize, and learn new tools does not disappear as quickly. Imagine losing your current role, but discovering that the skills you develop there allow you to move into 3 different industries. The loss still hurts, but your identity has somewhere to go. Contrast that with a person whose value was defined entirely by a company-specific process that no longer exists. Portable skills reduce this shock. They also make you more curious because learning becomes an investment in future flexibility rather than a reaction to immediate danger. Rule 12. Your attention is your most expensive resource. People often talk about money as the scarce resource. In modern life, attention may be scarcer. You can earn more money. You cannot reclaim an hour that disappeared into a sequence of notifications, arguments, videos, or anxious checking. Attention is the doorway through which your life becomes experience. Whatever repeatedly captures, it becomes part of what your day feels like. This means attention is not merely a productivity issue. It is a life design issue. Look at what happens when you begin the morning with other people's priorities. Messages arrive, headlines appear, comments provoke you, and suddenly your mind is busy before you have chosen what deserves it. You are not lazy. You are simply letting an external system allocate your mental budget. This is why boundaries around attention can feel surprisingly powerful. You do not have to consume less because every piece of information is bad. You consume less because not every piece deserves equal access to you. Cockate periods in which the world cannot easily interrupt you. Read without checking messages. Work without switching tabs every 3 minutes. Have conversations without looking at a screen. Give important tasks uninterrupted attention, and you will often discover that they require less total time than fragmented effort. Attention also gets stolen by internal loops. Replaying an argument, imagining a future disaster, monitoring someone's approval, or comparing your progress with strangers can consume enormous mental space while producing no useful action. When you notice an attention loop, ask whether you are solving something or rehearsing it. If you are solving, continue. If you are rehearsing, redirect. This does not mean living like a monk. Enjoy distraction, enjoy entertainment, enjoy curiosity. The issue is whether you can choose when to enter those states or whether they choose for you. Your attention becomes powerful when you begin treating it like money. Before spending it, ask what you are buying. At the end of a year, your life will partly be the sum of what you repeatedly gave your attention to. Spend it accordingly. Attention is also a boundary between your values and other people's agendas. Every platform is designed to compete for your time. Every notification asks a tiny question: will you look at me now? If you answer all of them automatically, the system gradually trains you to prioritize interruption over intention. Your attention is especially valuable when you are creating something difficult. Deep work, honest conversation, learning, and strategic planning all require a mind that can remain with one subject long enough for complexity to unfold. Constant switching creates the illusion of activity, while preventing the accumulation of understanding. Protecting attention, therefore, becomes a form of self-respect. You are saying that your own projects, thoughts, relationships, and inner life deserve access to you. The world will continue producing things that demand attention. Your responsibility is to decide what deserves a place in your mind. A useful test is to notice what you reach for when you have 10 free minutes. Your default attention reveals more about your priorities than your stated intentions. Protect your best hours for work that matters. The world will happily consume your highest energy attention on low-value tasks if you let it. Your attention can disappear even when you believe you are working. A day full of checking messages, scanning dashboards, answering low-value questions, and moving between tabs can produce exhaustion without producing depth. The mind gets many small rewards for responsiveness, while the important project waits in the background. Try measuring not only how much you did, but how often you allowed yourself to remain with something difficult long enough for real understanding to emerge. That is where attention becomes an asset rather than an expense. Part 3. Thinking in a Noisy World. Rule 13. Learn the difference between signal and noise. Not everything that reaches you deserves a response. This sounds obvious until you notice how much modern life is built around reacting to whatever is loudest. A message arrives and feels urgent. A headline makes you angry. A colleague has a dramatic opinion. A competitor launches something. Someone criticizes you online. Your brain receives all of it as information. But information is not the same thing as relevance. Signal helps you make a better decision. Noise demands attention without improving the decision. The problem is that noise is often more vivid than signal because it is designed to be noticed. Consider a workplace. 10 people may complain about a process in 10 different ways. The signal may be one repeated operational problem hidden underneath the noise of 10 individual frustrations. Or the reverse can happen. One loud complaint may dominate the conversation even though most people are satisfied. Your job is to look for repetition, consequences, and independent evidence. What keeps appearing? What changes behavior? What is measured? What persists after the emotional moment passes? This is especially important when making decisions from public opinion. Trends can be real, but they can also be temporary spikes. One viral post is not a market. One angry customer is not necessarily a customer base. One compliment is not proof that a strategy works. In your personal life, signal often feels quieter. Someone consistently showing up is signal. Someone making a dramatic promise is noise until the pattern supports it. A repeated boundary violation is signal. One strange mood may be noise. You become calmer when you stop treating every piece of information as equally important. Not every question deserves your answer. Not every opinion deserves your rebuttal. Not every opportunity deserves investigation. The discipline is not ignorance. It is prioritization. Learn to ask, what here changes what I should do? That question is a powerful filter. Signal becomes easier to detect when you know what outcome you are trying to influence. Without a clear decision, every piece of information can feel relevant. Once you define the decision, the filter becomes sharper. What facts would change the choice? What evidence would merely entertain me? What data would tell me that the strategy is working? Noise often arrives with a strong emotional charge. That is why it is attractive. Calm data rarely creates the same adrenaline as a shocking opinion. The discipline of separating the two is therefore partly emotional discipline. You have to tolerate the possibility that the most interesting piece of information is not the most useful one. Over time, this habit changes your relationship with the news, social media, and even gossip. You become less reactive because you are no longer treating every update as a demand for action. Information becomes something you sort rather than something you absorb indiscriminately. Signal often repeats quietly. Noise often spikes dramatically. Learn to compare what is loud with what persists. A pattern that survives 3 months deserves more attention than an outrage that lasts 3 days. The better your filter becomes, the less you need to know. You do not need every fact. You need the facts that change the decision. Consider the difference between a repeated customer complaint and a single angry review. The review may be louder, more emotional, and more visible. The repeated complaint may be quieter but more important because it appears across many cases. Signal often looks boring. Noise often arrives with drama. In your own life, this means you should sometimes distrust the most emotionally intense piece of information and inspect the quieter pattern underneath it. What keeps happening? What survives when the excitement disappears? That is where useful information often hides. Rule 14. Do not make permanent decisions from temporary emotions. Emotion is information, but it is not always a verdict. Anger can tell you that a boundary matters. Fear can tell you that something needs investigation. Sadness can tell you that a loss has meaning. Excitement can tell you that a possibility matters to you. None of those signals automatically tells you what action to take. The trouble begins when emotional intensity creates a false sense of certainty. You are furious, so leaving seems obviously correct. You are in love, so every warning sign looks irrelevant. You are terrified, so avoiding the opportunity feels like wisdom. The emotion may be legitimate while the action is premature. Temporary states can make permanent decisions feel urgent because you want relief. This is why cooling off periods are so valuable. A night of sleep will not solve your life, but it can change the chemical and emotional conditions under which you evaluate it. The rule is not ignore your feelings. Imagine doing that and becoming disconnected from your own experience. The wiser approach is to listen to the feeling and then interrogate the conclusion it seems to demand. Ask what the emotion is pointing toward. Anger may point toward disrespect. But does the disrespect need a conversation, a boundary, a change in the relationship, or simply time? Fear may point toward risk. Does the risk require avoidance, preparation, or more information? This distinction becomes crucial in conflict. Never underestimate what happens when two tired people try to solve a major relationship problem at midnight. They are not only discussing the issue, they are also negotiating exhaustion, insecurity, and the desire to end discomfort. Create personal rules for emotionally loaded decisions. You may decide never to resign in the middle of a rage, never to send an irreversible message while shaking with anger, or never to make a major purchase while euphoric. Temporary emotion can still reveal permanent truths. A recurring feeling deserves attention. But one powerful moment should not automatically write the next 10 years of your life. You are allowed to feel deeply and decide slowly. Sometimes the most courageous sentence is, "I am too emotional to know what I think yet." Permanent choices made during temporary states are dangerous because the future contains versions of you who may think differently. You do not need to deny today's emotion. You only need to respect tomorrow's perspective enough to give it a voice before you close a door forever. A cooling-off period is especially useful when your action would change your reputation or your relationships. Words sent in anger can be copied. Contracts signed in excitement can become expensive. Public announcements made during disappointment can define a story you later wish you had handled privately. This principle does not mean postponing everything. Sometimes, a clear emotion is telling you something that years of hesitation have hidden. The distinction is whether the emotion is revealing a long-standing pattern or merely dominating a single afternoon. Give recurring truth more weight than temporary intensity. A delayed response can also reveal whether the emotion was actually about the event or about accumulated stress. Sometimes the person you are angry with is only the final drop in a much fuller container. When an emotion keeps returning after the moment passes, listen carefully. Repetition may indicate an underlying value, boundary, or unresolved problem that deserves deliberate action. There is a reason people regret messages sent during anger. The emotion that produced the message may have lasted 20 minutes. The words can survive for years. Digital communication turns temporary states into permanent artifacts. A cooling-off period is therefore not only about becoming calmer. It is about protecting your future self from having to explain a version of you that existed briefly. You can still say what needs to be said. The question is whether the permanent record should be written by your most intense moment. Rule 15. The person who controls the frame often controls the conversation. Every conversation has a frame, even when nobody names it. A frame decides what kind of problem everyone thinks they are solving. Is this a negotiation or a favor? Is this a performance issue or a character issue? Is this a disagreement or a disrespect? Is this a question of price or value? Whoever defines the frame can influence what answers seem reasonable inside it. Imagine a manager saying, "Can you help by staying late?" Everyone needs to be a team player. The frame is loyalty. You might respond by defending your commitment, but the underlying issue could be staffing or unrealistic workload. Change the frame and the conversation changes. Let us discuss what work must be done and what resources or timeline are realistic. Framing is not manipulation by default. Good communication requires framing. The ethical question is whether the frame hides relevant information or clarifies it. You can protect yourself by noticing loaded assumptions. When someone asks, "Why are you refusing to support the team?" they have already framed the situation as support versus refusal. A stronger response may be, "I am not refusing to support the team. I am asking us to agree on priorities so the workload is sustainable." This technique matters in conflict because people often fight inside the wrong question. Two people argue about who is more selfish, when the real problem is that expectations were never defined. You can also use frames to improve your own thinking. Instead of asking, "How do I get more motivated?" ask, "How do I make the desired behavior easier?" Instead of asking, "How do I beat this competitor?" ask, "How do I create a category where I am differentiated?" A better question can produce a better strategy before any action occurs. When you feel trapped in a conversation, step outside the frame and name it. We seem to be treating this as an argument about loyalty, but I think it is actually an argument about capacity. That single move can lower heat and increase clarity. The person with the best answer does not always win. Sometimes the person who defines the real question wins. Learn to notice the frame before you start fighting inside it. Frames are powerful because they define what counts as success or failure before the argument even begins. If a meeting is framed as a test of loyalty, refusing extra work can look selfish. If it is framed as a resource allocation problem, the same refusal can become a reasonable capacity decision. The facts did not change. The meaning around the facts did. You can also change your own frame in private. A difficult career problem can be framed as, "Why am I failing?" Or, "What capability is this environment teaching me that I can carry somewhere else?" The second question does not make the difficulty disappear. It turns the difficulty into information. Be careful, though, not to use reframing as self-deception. A positive frame that ignores reality is just another illusion. Good framing makes relevant truth easier to see. Bad framing makes uncomfortable truth easier to avoid. Good framing does not mean controlling other people. It means making the problem precise enough that useful action becomes possible. We have a trust issue may feel profound, but we disagree about deadlines and ownership is easier to solve. Whenever a conversation becomes circular, ask whether the frame is too vague. Specificity often breaks deadlocks that emotion cannot. A disagreement about a missed deadline can become a character argument very quickly. You do not respect me. You are impossible to work with. Now the conversation is about identity, and identity is hard to negotiate. Change the frame. We had a deadline. The deliverable was late, and we need to understand what caused the miss. The second frame is less emotionally satisfying because it contains fewer moral judgments. It is also more useful because it creates a problem that can actually be solved. Rule 16. Make yourself hard to replace, not easy to use. There is a difference between being valuable and being convenient. Convenient people absorb requests, fix problems, answer instantly, and rarely create friction. Valuable people create outcomes that are difficult to reproduce. If you are always available but easily replaceable, people may appreciate you without giving you meaningful leverage. If you become highly capable in an important area while maintaining boundaries, the relationship changes. This is not an argument for hoarding information or sabotaging others so that you remain indispensable. That strategy creates fragile systems and often breeds distrust. True value comes from competence, judgment, and the ability to improve the environment around you. Ask what you can learn that compounds. Can you understand a problem better than most people? Can you make difficult information clear? Can you solve a bottleneck? Can you build trust with difficult stakeholders? Can you connect ideas across departments? These are forms of value that are harder to replace than simple availability. Be careful, though. Hard to replace can become another excuse for overwork. If your value exists only because you are carrying an impossible load, the system is not healthy. Build processes, teach others, document what matters, and then keep developing into problems that require higher judgment. Your goal is not dependency. It is differentiation. A business owner, employee, freelancer, or creator who understands this stops asking only, "How can I work more?" They start asking, "What can I do that creates disproportionate value?" When you think this way, your career becomes less about collecting tasks and more about collecting leverage. Let other people appreciate your reliability. But make sure they also understand the specific value you create. Useful is good. Distinctively useful is better. The danger of becoming hard to replace is that you can accidentally make yourself a prisoner of your own importance. If every process depends on you, leaving becomes costly. The healthier goal is to create value and then create systems that let value continue without your constant rescue. Differentiation can come from judgment rather than raw productivity. Two people may complete the same number of tasks, but one knows which tasks should not be done at all. Strategic value often comes from deciding where attention belongs, what risk matters, and which trade-offs are worth making. People remember those forms of value because they reduce uncertainty. When you consistently make difficult situations clearer, you become someone others seek out not because you are always available, but because your perspective changes the quality of the decision. Be careful with the word indispensable. Systems that rely on one hero are fragile. The better target is to become highly valuable while helping the system become more capable. That kind of value is respected because it produces results without demanding dependence. You become a source of strength rather than a bottleneck. A skilled employee is often asked to help because they are competent. Over time, that competence can become a trap if every new problem is automatically sent their way. The answer is not to become less capable. It is to make the value visible and the workload sustainable. Document what you do. Teach others where appropriate. Clarify priorities, then invest in higher-level skills. The goal is to move upward in difficulty rather than simply collecting more tasks. That is how usefulness becomes leverage instead of exhaustion. Rule 17. Do not chase every opportunity. Build a filter. Opportunity is seductive because it looks like possibility. A new project appears. A partnership sounds promising. Someone invites you into a new venture. A course promises a new skill. A social connection seems strategically useful. The more ambitious you become, the more opportunities you will see. That is when a new problem begins. Abundance can destroy focus. If every opportunity is treated as important, nothing is important. You become busy, visible, and scattered. You start confusing motion with progress. A filter protects you from your own curiosity. Define what you are building, what you are unwilling to sacrifice, and which forms of opportunity actually fit your direction. A good opportunity should not merely be exciting. It should be relevant. Ask what the opportunity costs. Time is not free. Attention is not free. Reputation is not free. Every yes creates an invisible set of no's. You may not know which ones you just rejected because you were too busy to notice. Filters also protect you from status. Some opportunities are attractive because other people will think they are impressive. But your life is not a resume being graded by strangers. You can say, "This is interesting, but it is not for me right now." That sentence is a sign of strategic maturity. The right filter may include income, learning, relationships, strategic position, or personal meaning. You do not need every category in every decision. You need enough clarity to distinguish opportunity from distraction. One of the quiet advantages of having a direction is that rejection becomes easier. You are not rejecting the world. You are protecting the path you chose. The jungle is full of doors. Wisdom is knowing which ones lead somewhere you actually want to go. Filters protect more than time. They protect identity. When you accept every invitation, your calendar begins to define you. One person becomes a consultant by doing everything for everyone. Another becomes a creator by chasing every trend. Another becomes a manager by accepting every responsibility. Eventually, the original intention is buried under opportunities. A useful filter can be as simple as 3 questions. Does this fit what I am building? Does it create meaningful value? What will it prevent me from doing? The last question is usually forgotten, yet it is where opportunity becomes opportunity cost. You will occasionally reject something that later looks brilliant. That is unavoidable. A filter is not a crystal ball. It is a way of making decisions with limited attention. Your goal is not to be open to everything. It is to be open to the right things often enough. A filter is not a wall. Leave room for surprise. Some of the best opportunities in life are not obvious in advance. The purpose of filtering is to protect attention, not to eliminate curiosity. When something falls outside your current plan, ask whether it offers an unusually strong reason to change the plan. That preserves flexibility without surrendering direction. Suppose 3 opportunities arrive in the same week. One pays well but pulls you away from your main direction. One is prestigious but offers little learning. The third is modest but aligns with the capabilities you are building. Without a filter, the loudest opportunity usually wins. With a filter, you can choose based on what the opportunity contributes to the life you are actually constructing. Saying no to the first 2 may feel irrational for a day. 6 months later, it may look like discipline. Rule 18. Do not let one bad experience become a worldview. A painful experience can become a teacher, but it can also become a prison. Someone betrays you and you decide people cannot be trusted. A business fails and you decide risk is foolish. A relationship ends badly and you decide intimacy is dangerous. The mind loves this kind of conclusion because a rule feels safer than uncertainty. The problem is that one event is often too small to support a worldview. You need to separate the specific lesson from the global story. Perhaps that person was unreliable. That does not prove everyone is. Perhaps your business model was weak. That does not prove entrepreneurship is impossible. Perhaps the relationship was unhealthy. That does not make closeness itself a mistake. Pain encourages overgeneralization because general rules feel protective. If you decide never to trust, you reduce the possibility of being betrayed again. You also reduce the possibility of being deeply connected. Protection and limitation can look identical from a distance. After a major disappointment, ask what the smallest true lesson is. I need stronger screening. I need a written agreement. I need to stop ignoring early warning signs. These lessons improve your behavior without poisoning your view of the entire world. You should also allow positive evidence to update you. If 10 people behave well after one person behaves badly, do not let the one person remain the only evidence that counts. Forgiveness is not required for learning. You can remember the lesson without carrying the emotional architecture of the event forever. Over time, resilient people develop a more nuanced view. They become neither naive nor cynical. They become selective. Your future deserves to be larger than your worst experience. Let the wound teach you where to be careful. Do not let it decide what you are allowed to become. One bad experience can become especially powerful when it confirms something you already fear. If you already suspect that people leave, a breakup becomes proof. If you already distrust institutions, one unfair event becomes evidence that the whole system is corrupt. The mind prefers confirmation to complexity because confirmation feels safer. You can interrupt that process by deliberately looking for counterexamples, not to force optimism, but to prevent the story from becoming total. Who treated you well? What worked? Which part of the experience was specific to the circumstances? What would you tell a friend who drew the same conclusion? Recovery often means becoming more specific. I should never trust again is a broad statement. I need to verify claims before I rely on them is a useful one. The second sentence carries less drama but far more protection. The strongest recovery stories are often about specificity. People rarely heal by deciding that everything is fine. They heal by learning exactly what happened, what it meant, and what they will do differently next time. Do not make the world smaller to avoid being hurt again. Make your judgment sharper. That is a form of resilience that leaves room for good experiences. After a painful breakup, it is tempting to decide that relationships are a mistake. Yet the most useful lesson may be much smaller. You ignored repeated incompatibilities because you wanted the story to work. That is painful knowledge, but it is actionable. You can learn to ask better questions, move more slowly, and pay attention to consistency. The future does not need to repeat the past, simply because the past was painful. A specific lesson can become a better filter rather than a permanent wall. Part 4, The Long Game. Rule 19. Your future self is a stranger you are responsible for. You know the person you are today. Tomorrow's version of you is more abstract. That is why people repeatedly make decisions that their future selves will have to pay for. You spend because future income feels distant. You postpone difficult learning because the consequences of not learning are invisible today. You neglect sleep because tomorrow seems like another country. You stay in situations that drain you because leaving requires discomfort now. Your future self is not imaginary. That person will wake up inside the consequences of what you decide today. This is why delayed consequences are psychologically dangerous. The current reward is vivid. The future cost is a sentence in your head. The brain naturally favors what it can feel now. One way to counter this is to make the future more concrete. Write a letter to yourself 6 months from now. Ask what you will wish you had started earlier. Consider what today's habits are likely to compound into. Compounding is not only financial. Skills compound, reputation compounds, health habits compound, relationships compound. So do neglected problems. Your future self will also have different preferences. The person you are today may desperately want one thing and later discover that the thing mattered less than expected. That is another reason to avoid irreversible decisions based solely on temporary identity. Create options for the person you will become. Keep learning. Protect your reputation. Avoid unnecessary damage to your health, relationships, and finances. Leave some room in your life for the person who has not arrived yet. One of the most respectful things you can do for yourself is to stop treating tomorrow's version of you like a stranger who deserves whatever you leave behind. Today is borrowing from the future. Spend carefully. Your future self will inherit not only your possessions but your defaults. If today you avoid difficult conversations, tomorrow you inherit the accumulated complexity of avoided conversations. If you build a habit of learning, tomorrow you inherit capability. This is why tiny choices can matter more than dramatic resolutions. There is also a relational dimension. Future, you may have different responsibilities. Children, parents, a partner, a business, or people who depend on your judgment. You cannot predict every role you will occupy, but you can become the kind of person those roles will benefit from. Imagine meeting your future self as a person rather than an abstraction. What would that person thank you for protecting? What would they wish you had stopped doing earlier? The answers often reveal priorities that the present moment hides. Future-oriented thinking becomes easier when you turn vague intentions into scheduled behavior. A future you who should exercise more is less protected than a future you who has a recurring time reserved for it. Do not demand perfect sacrifice from the present for the sake of an imaginary future. The point is balance. Make choices that leave tomorrow stronger without making today unbearable. Think about a financial decision that seems harmless today. One subscription, one unnecessary debt, one postponed savings habit. The immediate effect is tiny, so the brain discounts it. But repeated small decisions become the environment your future self must live inside. The same principle works positively. 1 hour of learning each week may feel insignificant, yet over years it can create a skill that changes your career. Your future is built less by dramatic promises than by ordinary defaults. Rule 20. The slowest person in the room may see the most. Fast environments reward quick responses. Meetings race. Messages expect instant answers. People interrupt to prove they are engaged. In that atmosphere, slowness can look like weakness. Sometimes it is the opposite. The person who pauses may be the person noticing the contradiction everyone else has accepted. The quiet colleague may see that the plan depends on an assumption nobody tested. The friend who does not immediately take sides may notice that both people are telling only the parts of the story that flatter them. Attention needs time. So does judgment. The mind often rewards speed because certainty feels productive. But important decisions sometimes benefit from a deliberate gap between input and response. You do not need to become slow at everything. The skill is knowing where speed helps and where it creates noise. In conversation, try allowing a few seconds after someone finishes speaking. You may hear more than you would if you rushed to fill the space. In negotiation, do not immediately answer a proposal. Silence can give you information about how confident the other side is in their position. Slow thinking is especially valuable when emotion is high or the decision is difficult to reverse. What feels like hesitation can actually be quality control there is also a social cost to slowness. You may worry about looking uncertain, but uncertainty, honestly expressed, is often more intelligent than certainty performed. Give yourself permission to say, "I want to think about that." Sometimes the best contribution in the room is not the fastest answer. It is the question that nobody else thought to ask. Slowing down changes the quality of the questions you can ask. Speed encourages binary thinking. Yes or no, good or bad, winner or loser. Time creates room for gradients. Maybe the idea is good, but the timing is wrong. Maybe the person is trustworthy in one domain, but not another. Maybe the opportunity is worth pursuing only under different terms. Slowness also allows other people to reveal themselves. In negotiations, silence gives someone the chance to add information they would not volunteer into a fast exchange. In relationships, patience reveals whether a behavior is a one-time event or a stable pattern. You do not need to advertise your slowness. The strongest version is internal. Think carefully, then speak simply. A calm answer after a pause often carries more weight than a clever answer delivered instantly. Silence also exposes assumptions. When you do not rush to answer, other people may fill the space with information they did not plan to give you. This can be especially useful when someone is trying to persuade you. You can be fast and deliberate by preparing your slow thinking in advance. Decision rules, checklists, and clear criteria allow you to act quickly without becoming impulsive. In a meeting where everyone agrees too quickly, the person who asks for another day can sound difficult. But what if the decision depends on an assumption nobody checked? Speed may create social comfort, while slowness protects the quality of the decision. You do not need to resist every deadline. Simply learn to recognize the moments when the cost of being wrong is much larger than the cost of waiting. That is when the quiet person can become the most valuable person in the room. Rule 21. Fear is a signal to investigate, not a command to obey. Fear has a bad reputation because people sometimes use courage to mean the absence of fear. In reality, fear is a biological alarm system, and alarms can be useful even when they are not always accurate. When fear appears, start with respect. Something inside you has detected a threat, real or imagined. Your first task is not to suppress it. Your first task is to investigate. What exactly are you afraid will happen? How likely is it? What evidence supports the fear? What evidence weakens it? What would preparation look like if the threat were real? Sometimes fear reveals danger you have been ignoring. A job may be unstable. A person may repeatedly cross boundaries. A contract may expose you to risk you did not understand. Fear in those cases is a signal that deserves attention. Other times, fear is a prediction machine running without enough data. You fear public speaking, so your mind predicts humiliation. You fear changing careers, so the unknown becomes catastrophe. You fear disappointing someone, so a simple boundary feels like abandonment. The goal is not to prove that the fear is false. The goal is to test it. Action often changes fear more effectively than reassurance. Research the thing. Take the smaller step. Gather evidence. Practice. Talk to someone who has actually done it. Turn the vague threat into specific questions. You can also distinguish danger from discomfort. Growth often feels uncomfortable. Discomfort does not automatically mean that something is wrong. Fear becomes dangerous when it is allowed to make every decision on your behalf. A life organized entirely around avoiding fear becomes smaller and smaller. Listen to fear. Investigate it. Then decide. Fear often becomes more manageable when you turn a vague threat into a sequence of smaller questions. Instead of, "What if this fails?" ask, "What is the first thing that could go wrong? How would I know? What could I do then?" Specificity turns a monster into a set of decisions. It is also useful to distinguish anticipated pain from actual danger. Rejection may hurt without destroying you. Embarrassment may be uncomfortable without being unsafe. A career transition may be uncertain without being reckless. When the threat is emotional rather than physical, courage often means allowing discomfort while still moving towards something that matters. On the other hand, do not romanticize fearlessness. Sometimes fear is exactly what prevents a foolish decision. The mature response is neither always face your fears nor always trust your fear. It is investigate the information inside the fear, then decide from evidence. Fear can be especially useful before irreversible action. It may be telling you to gather more evidence before you close a door, sign a contract, or trust someone with something valuable. But after enough evidence arrives, endless investigation can become another form of avoidance. At some point, courage means acting despite the remaining uncertainty. Imagine turning a frightening career possibility into a series of questions. What exactly could fail? How much money would I need to survive the transition? What evidence would tell me to stop? What skills would transfer if the plan changed? Fear becomes less mysterious when you can see the moving parts. It may still be uncomfortable, but uncertainty has become something you can work with. Courage often looks less like confidence and more like the willingness to collect information while moving. Rule 22. Comparison is a terrible accountant. Comparison feels natural because it gives the mind a reference point. You look around and ask where you stand. The problem is that the comparison is usually incomplete. You compare your salary to someone's salary without knowing their debt. You compare your career to someone's title without knowing their private stress. You compare your relationship to an image created for public consumption. You compare your ordinary day with another person's highlight reel. Even when the information is accurate, comparison can still be misleading because people optimize for different things. One person wants security, another wants freedom, another wants prestige, another wants time with family. There is no universal scoreboard. The better accountant is your own trajectory. Are you more capable than you were a year ago? Is your financial structure safer? Are your relationships healthier? Are you clearer about what you want? This does not mean ignoring the external world. Competition can provide useful information. If someone is succeeding with a strategy you have not considered, study it. The mistake is using comparison only to judge your worth rather than to collect information. Comparison becomes especially destructive when it has no finish line. There is always another person with more money, more followers, more status, or a faster path. If your standard is enough to beat everyone, you have chosen an impossible game. Create internal measures. How well do you keep promises to yourself? How often do you act according to your values? How much freedom have you built? What kind of person are you becoming? You may still feel envy. That is human. But you no longer need envy to run the accounting department of your life. Let other people provide data. Do not let them provide your definition of success. Comparison becomes particularly irrational when the measurement itself is unstable. One year you compare income, the next followers, the next property, the next productivity. Every time the scoreboard changes, the finish line moves. You can spend a lifetime winning categories that were never truly yours. External benchmarks are still useful when they answer a practical question. Are you being paid fairly for your role? Is your business growing faster or slower than the market? Are you improving a skill relative to a professional standard? These are comparisons with a purpose. They become harmful when the purpose is simply to decide whether you are enough. A good life needs private measurements. How much freedom do you have? How honest are your relationships? How often do you act according to what you say matters? These numbers are harder to post online, but they are often closer to the life you actually experience. A private definition of enough protects you from an endless escalation of comparison. Without one, every success becomes a new starting line. Ask what you want your success to make possible. If the answer is freedom, design for freedom. If the answer is contribution, design for contribution. Numbers are useful only when connected to a life they are supposed to serve. A comparison can be useful when it helps you answer a concrete question, such as whether your compensation is within a reasonable market range. It becomes corrosive when it becomes a permanent referendum on your worth. The distinction is purpose. Ask what the comparison is for. If it can tell you something actionable, use it. If it can only produce shame, resentment, or frantic imitation, the information may no longer be worth the emotional price. Rule 23. Money magnifies behavior. It does not cure character. Money changes what is possible, but it does not automatically change who you are. In fact, greater resources often make existing tendencies more visible because you have more room to act on them. A generous person with more money can become extraordinarily helpful. An insecure person can become more status-driven. A controlling person can gain more tools for control. A reckless person can take larger risks. Wealth creates capacity. Character determines much of what gets done with it. This is why money should be treated as an amplifier rather than a personality transplant. People sometimes postpone self-respect until they earn more. They imagine that a larger bank balance will finally make them calm, admired, or secure. It can solve real problems, and financial stability matters greatly. But unresolved emotional patterns often travel with the person who earns the money. If you are already unable to say no, more money may simply create more situations in which people ask. If you are already addicted to status, a higher income may move the comparison target farther away rather than satisfying you. Use money to buy options, not merely symbols. Reduce dangerous dependence. Invest in skills. Create breathing room. Protect the freedom to make decisions without panic. At the same time, be careful about judging character through visible wealth. Money is affected by timing, family background, opportunity, luck, access, and countless variables. It is not a perfect moral score. Your goal is not to become wealthy so that you can prove something about yourself. It is to build enough financial competence that money becomes a tool instead of a permanent source of fear. Who you are still matters after the number on the screen changes. Money can magnify a life. It cannot write the life for you. Money also reveals how much of your behavior is driven by scarcity. When people feel financially trapped, they may accept poor terms, hide mistakes, avoid medical care, remain in unhealthy environments, or delay learning because immediate bills dominate attention. That is why building financial margin is psychologically useful, even when wealth is not the goal. At the same time, more money can create new forms of fear. A person who once worried about paying bills may later worry about preserving status, protecting assets, or maintaining a lifestyle. If the underlying emotional pattern is never examined, the number simply changes while the anxiety remains. Use money to create breathing room. Let it reduce unnecessary dependence, increase options, and support the values you already want to live by. If it becomes the measure of your identity, you will eventually discover that the measurement never says enough. Character can become easier to see around money because stakes become visible. Watch how someone treats a small amount, a shared expense, or an agreement when nobody would blame them for cutting a corner. Financial skill is partly emotional skill. You need enough self-control to delay gratification, enough curiosity to understand numbers, and enough humility to ask for help when the system is outside your expertise. Two people can earn the same amount of money and experience entirely different lives because their behavior around money is different. One uses money to build margin and options. The other uses the same income to maintain an image and increase obligations. The number is identical. The structure is not. Financial progress, therefore, requires more than earning. It requires understanding what your money is doing to your freedom, your stress, and your dependence on future income. Rule 24. Never confuse access with intimacy. We live in a time when access has become extremely easy. You can follow someone, message them, see their daily life, hear their opinions, and know small details about them without actually knowing them deeply. Access creates familiarity. Familiarity creates the feeling of closeness. But the two are not identical. You can spend hours talking to someone online and still know very little about how they behave under pressure. You can work beside a colleague for years and never see how they handle betrayal, money, or a serious failure. You can know someone's stories without knowing their character. Intimacy requires more than information. It requires mutual vulnerability, trust, respect, and repeated experience. It is built through what happens when the image becomes inconvenient. This distinction protects you from premature attachment. Emotional intensity can create the feeling that you have known someone forever. Give the relationship time to develop evidence. It also protects you from parasocial confusion. Seeing someone regularly does not create a mutual relationship. Consuming someone's content does not mean you know them. Admiration can be real without being reciprocal. In personal life, ask what you actually know. How does this person behave when disappointed, when embarrassed, when they have power, when they have nothing to gain? These situations reveal more than shared tastes or intense conversations. You do not need to become cold. You simply need to let intimacy be earned by experience rather than manufactured by frequency of contact. Access tells you that a door is open. Intimacy tells you what happens after you walk through it. Do not confuse the first with the second. Access can produce a false sense of obligation. Because someone can reach you, you may feel that you owe a response. Because you see their life, you may feel that you understand it. Because you talk frequently, you may believe the relationship is deeper than it actually is. Trust grows through moments that cost something. A person protects your confidence when gossip would be rewarding. They respect a boundary when frustration would make disrespect easier. They tell you a difficult truth even when a compliment would be more comfortable. Those are the experiences that turn access into actual intimacy. Give relationships room to become real. You do not need to rush emotional definitions. Let time reveal what attention alone cannot. Sometimes the most intimate thing people can do is remain consistent after novelty disappears. Real intimacy also allows difference. If closeness depends on constant access, then a little distance feels like rejection. Mature relationships can survive silence, separate interests, and independent lives. Give people space to remain themselves. The goal of intimacy is not possession. It is trust between two people who still have a self outside the relationship. You may talk with someone every day and still discover, during the first real crisis, that you do not know how they handle responsibility. Another person may speak to you less frequently but show remarkable consistency when something matters. This is why intimacy should be evaluated through behavior under meaningful conditions, not only through frequency or emotional intensity. Access tells you how often you can reach someone. Trust tells you what happens when reaching them actually matters. Part 5. Strength, Exit, and Adaptation. Rule 25. Master the art of leaving. Staying is emotionally easier to explain than leaving. You can say you are giving something more time, waiting for things to improve, honoring a commitment, protecting stability, or avoiding unnecessary conflict. Sometimes staying is wise. Sometimes staying is simply fear wearing respectable clothing. Leaving is difficult because it converts uncertainty into visible loss. Once you leave a job, the title is gone. Once you end a relationship, the shared future is gone. Once you abandon a failing project, you have to admit that the original plan was not working. This is why people stay too long. The cost of the past creates emotional pressure to protect it. But the future does not know how much you have already invested. It only responds to what you continue investing from this moment forward. Master the art of leaving by defining your conditions in advance. What behavior is unacceptable? What evidence would make you change direction? How long will you test a strategy before reviewing it honestly? Predefined criteria protect you from endless rationalization. Leaving does not mean giving up at the first difficulty. Resilience sometimes requires staying through discomfort, learning curves, and temporary setbacks. The difference is whether you are moving through a challenge or repeatedly paying for the same problem. The ability to leave also changes how you behave while staying. You negotiate more clearly. You tolerate less manipulation. You become less desperate for approval. You are not constantly threatening to leave. You simply know you can. You do not need to announce every exit dramatically. Some endings can be quiet. A project ends, a conversation ends, a season ends. Your life will contain doors that looked promising from the outside and wrong from the inside. Wisdom is not knowing before you enter every door. Wisdom is being willing to leave when the evidence changes. Leaving is not always failure. Sometimes it is the most accurate response to reality. Leaving becomes easier when you stop treating it as a verdict on your past self. You chose with the information you had then. New information changed the equation. Updating is not humiliation. It is what rational people do when reality moves. There is also a difference between leaving a situation and leaving a lesson. You can abandon a project without abandoning the skill it taught you. You can end a relationship without concluding that love was a mistake. You can leave a career without declaring the years wasted. Carry the learning. Leave the structure. Sometimes the hardest part is accepting that the other person may not understand your reason for leaving. You are responsible for communicating honestly, not for producing their perfect emotional reaction. A clean exit is often less dramatic than the internal story you imagined, and that can be a good thing. Before leaving, ask whether you are escaping discomfort or responding to evidence. Growth can feel miserable in the short term. A difficult period is not automatically a wrong path, but if the same warning signs repeat and the cost keeps rising, loyalty becomes self-abandonment. Leaving can be an act of respect for the life you still have time to build. Leaving is often hardest when the external world still says the situation looks good. The job has a respectable title. The relationship looks fine to outsiders. The project has already consumed years. But private experience may tell a different story. You are not required to remain in a situation just because it photographs well. The honest question is whether the future value justifies the ongoing cost. Sometimes the answer is yes. Sometimes the most responsible answer is to close the chapter. Rule 26. Build quiet power. Not all power needs to be visible. In fact, the strongest forms of personal power are often quiet. Financial breathing room, competence, emotional self-control, a reputation for reliability, strong relationships, and the ability to walk away from bad deals. Quiet power does not seek constant proof. It accumulates privately and appears when needed. You build it by reducing unnecessary dependence. You build it by learning skills before the crisis arrives. You build it by protecting your health enough to remain capable, by keeping promises, by controlling your impulses, and by maintaining relationships that are not based solely on what someone can give you. People sometimes confuse power with dominance. Dominance is one form of power, but it is often expensive because it creates resistance. Quiet power is more sustainable. It gives you room to negotiate without threatening, disagree without exploding, and leave without performing the departure for an audience. One of the best signs of quiet power is emotional range. You can tolerate being disliked. You can tolerate uncertainty. You can hear criticism without collapsing. You can hear praise without becoming dependent on it. Another sign is patience. When you are desperate, every option looks urgent. When you have built reserves, you can wait for better terms. Quiet power also includes the ability to keep some parts of life private. Not every plan needs an audience. Not every success needs an announcement. Sometimes protecting an idea while it is fragile is wiser than displaying it before it is ready. This kind of power does not require you to become secretive. It simply recognizes that visibility is not the same as strength. If you want to become harder to manipulate, build things that give you alternatives. If you want to become calmer, build systems that reduce avoidable emergencies. If you want to become more confident, build evidence through competence. Quiet power is what remains when nobody is clapping. Quiet power is built from boring decisions repeated for a long time. Keeping expenses manageable. Learning when you could be resting instead. Calling someone back. Refusing to make an important decision while angry. Keeping your word. Saving a little. Practicing a skill when nobody is watching. None of these behaviors looks impressive in isolation, but power compounds. The person who has quietly built competence, trust, reserves, and options can behave differently when pressure arrives. They do not need to bluff because they have something real underneath the posture. That is the advantage of private strength. It cannot be taken away by one criticism, one failed launch, one rejection, or one bad month. You may still lose. You simply lose from a stronger position. Quiet power also means knowing what not to prove. You do not need to respond to every challenge to demonstrate strength. Sometimes refusing to perform is itself evidence that you are secure. Build enough internal stability that praise becomes pleasant instead of necessary, and criticism becomes information instead of an emergency. A person with quiet power rarely needs to announce that they have options. Their calmness becomes the evidence. They can wait. They can ask a harder question. They can decline. They can walk away. They can start again. This does not make them invulnerable. It means they have reduced the number of situations in which panic can dictate behavior. That is one of the most practical definitions of personal power. The ability to keep choosing under pressure. Rule 27. Read incentives before you read words. People tell you what they think, what they want you to believe, and sometimes what they sincerely hope will happen. Their incentives tell you what they are structurally rewarded for doing. This is not a claim that everyone is dishonest. It is a reminder that good intentions exist inside systems of consequences. A salesperson may genuinely believe their product will help you and still be rewarded for closing the deal. A manager may care about your career and still be under pressure to cut costs. A politician may sincerely support a principle and still respond to the incentives of voters, donors, or institutions. When words and incentives align, trust becomes easier. When they conflict, pay attention. This is especially useful in organizations. Before asking why someone behaved a certain way, ask what their role rewards. Before assuming a team is incompetent, ask whether the system punishes initiative. Before blaming an employee for avoiding responsibility, ask whether responsibility carries risk without reward. In personal relationships, incentives can be subtler. A person may want closeness, but also want to avoid accountability. Someone may love you and still benefit from keeping you uncertain. A friend may support your success, but feel threatened by the change it creates. Again, incentives are not proof of bad character. They are context. When you understand the structure, you stop interpreting every action as a personal mystery. You can change the environment, negotiate different incentives, or protect yourself accordingly. Words tell you the story people are presenting. Incentives help you understand the pressure beneath the story. Learn to read both. Incentives can also explain why smart people make decisions that look irrational from the outside. If a team is rewarded for hitting a quarterly number, they may sacrifice long-term quality. If a platform rewards engagement, outrage can become more valuable than accuracy. If an employee is punished for mistakes but not rewarded for initiative, caution becomes rational behavior inside the system. When you understand incentives, you can improve environments instead of endlessly blaming individuals. Change what gets measured. Change what gets rewarded. Change what happens after failure. Sometimes the behavior you dislike is a predictable response to a structure you helped create. In your own life, inspect the incentives you have built. If you say health matters but reward yourself only for working late, the system is misaligned. If you want to write but give every free hour to notifications, the system is misaligned. Behavior follows incentives more often than aspirations admit. Incentives are often more reliable than stated priorities. If an organization says quality matters but rewards only speed, the real policy is speed. If a relationship says honesty matters but punishes every honest disagreement, people will learn to conceal. Before changing your behavior, look at the consequences surrounding it. Sometimes the behavior will change automatically once the reward structure changes. Consider a manager who says the team should take initiative, but criticizes every experiment that fails. The stated incentive is innovation. The real incentive is risk avoidance. Employees will quickly learn which message matters. You can apply the same logic to yourself. If you say you want to build a business but reward yourself only for staying comfortable, your behavior will follow the reward. Read the structure around your goals, not just the language you use to describe them. Rule 28. Adapt without losing your core. Adaptation is one of the most useful human abilities, but it can become self-erasure when used without a center. You enter a new environment and learn how to fit in. You change your language, habits, strategy, and presentation. At first, this is healthy. Then one day you realize you are no longer sure which parts of your behavior are adaptation and which parts are identity. You need flexibility, but you also need anchors. Your core might include values rather than specific habits. Honesty, responsibility, loyalty, curiosity, dignity, craftsmanship, family, freedom, or service. The expression can change with context while the value remains. A person can become a more effective communicator without becoming dishonest. They can learn to negotiate without becoming exploitative. They can become more strategic without becoming manipulative. They can become tougher without becoming cruel. This distinction matters because environments reward conformity. If everyone around you behaves badly, you may start treating bad behavior as normal. If success seems to require constant self-promotion, you may abandon privacy. If everyone is cynical, kindness can start looking foolish. Adaptation should help you navigate reality, not force you to become someone you dislike. One practical question is worth carrying. What must remain true about me even if my circumstances change? Those answers become your internal constitution. Once you have those anchors, experimentation becomes safer. You can change tactics without changing your identity. You can leave an environment without feeling that you have lost yourself. Resilient people do not stay identical. They stay recognizable to themselves. Chance your strategy when reality demands it. Protect the principles that make the strategy worth having. Adaptation becomes easier when you separate your methods from your values. Your method of working may change. Your career path may change. Your communication style may mature. But if you know what you are protecting, honesty, dignity, curiosity, responsibility, you can change tactics without feeling like you have betrayed yourself. There will be moments when adapting feels like surrender. You may enter an environment where your old way of doing things is simply ineffective. The goal is not to prove that your old method was morally superior. The goal is to learn what works without absorbing what you consider corrosive. Healthy adaptation is selective. Take the useful parts. Reject the rest. Learn from people you do not admire. You can study someone's strategy without adopting their character. That is one of the clearest signs that your identity has a stable center. Adaptation is easier when you expect to revise your identity at least slightly. You do not need to decide once and defend the decision forever. Keep a few principles sacred, but keep many preferences experimental. That combination makes you both grounded and flexible. A person can enter a new industry and discover that many old habits no longer work. The temptation is to defend the old approach because it once created success, but the environment changed. Holding on to the previous method may feel like consistency while actually becoming rigidity. Adaptation asks a different question. What principle was the old method serving, and how can I serve that principle under the new conditions? That is how you change tactics without losing yourself. Rule 29. Choose your enemies carefully. Conflict is unavoidable. Making everyone your enemy is optional. Some people become exhausted because they treat every disagreement as a battle of character. A delayed email becomes disrespect. A competitor becomes a villain. A criticism becomes an attack. Soon they are spending more energy fighting interpretations than solving problems. Not every opponent deserves your full attention. Some conflicts matter. Others are expensive theater. Before engaging, ask what outcome you actually want. Do you want repair, protection, accountability, distance, or victory? Those are different goals and require different strategies. Also ask whether the person is strategically important. You do not need to retaliate against every person who misunderstands you. Reputation does not require universal correction. Sometimes your best answer is to keep doing excellent work. When conflict is necessary, choose the terrain. Private conversations often solve what public arguments make worse. Clear documentation can solve what emotional debates cannot. A boundary can be more powerful than a counterattack. You should also understand asymmetry. Some enemies can cost you far more than you can cost them. Do not fight simply because you are angry. Protect your long-term position. At the same time, avoiding every conflict is not wisdom. Some patterns only stop when someone names them. A boundary without enforcement becomes a suggestion. A culture without consequences invites repeated violations. The mature approach is selective courage. You defend what matters. You ignore what does not. You leave when the fight is structurally unwinnable. And you do not confuse silence with weakness or aggression with strength. Your energy is limited. Spend it where the outcome is worth the cost. Conflict becomes easier to manage when you stop requiring it to produce emotional justice. You may never receive the apology you think you deserve. A competitor may never admit that you were right. A difficult person may tell a story in which they are the hero forever. Waiting for emotional closure can keep you attached to a fight long after the practical issue is over. Choose your enemies carefully also means choose your energy carefully. Some people are dangerous because they are powerful. Others are dangerous because they are chaotic. Some are simply loud. Learn the difference. A loud disagreement may be harmless. A quiet pattern of sabotage may matter much more. There are times when the strongest move is documentation, distance, and consistency. Let facts accumulate. Protect your work. Protect your people. Do not become so obsessed with defeating an opponent that you start behaving like the person you were trying to resist. There is also a reputational risk in unnecessary conflict. Even when you win, the story may become that you are difficult, vindictive, or exhausting. Sometimes protecting your position means protecting the social cost of how you fight. When confrontation is necessary, make your behavior easier to defend than the other person's. Stay factual, stay measured. Let the pattern speak. A public fight can create an audience, but an audience can become a prison. Once everyone has watched you attack someone, backing away may feel like weakness, even when the conflict is no longer useful. This is why private resolution and quiet distance are often underrated. You do not always need a final scene. Sometimes the smartest victory is simply that the conflict stops consuming your attention. Rule 30. Become the person who can survive change. If there is one rule that ties the entire jungle together, it is this: build yourself around the ability to adapt. Jobs change, platforms change, industries change, relationships change, markets change, your own priorities change. A strategy that worked 5 years ago can become a trap simply because the environment moved. The goal is not to predict every change. You cannot. The goal is to remain capable when prediction fails. That requires a combination of skills, relationships, financial discipline, emotional flexibility, physical capacity, curiosity, and the willingness to begin again when necessary. People often imagine resilience as toughness. Toughness matters, but flexibility matters too. A rigid person can survive one storm and break in the next because they refuse to change shape. Resilience is the ability to absorb information, update the plan, and continue without losing the core of who you are. Build a life with multiple sources of strength. Learn more than one useful skill. Maintain relationships beyond your immediate role. Keep some financial margin when possible. Protect your reputation. Practice making decisions without perfect information. Learn how you respond to uncertainty. Most importantly, become comfortable being a beginner again. Change often requires humility, because the skills that made you successful in one environment may not transfer automatically into another. The person who can learn without feeling humiliated has an enormous advantage. Your identity should not depend entirely on one job, one audience, one platform, one relationship, or one version of yourself. Those can be important chapters without becoming the entire book. When change arrives, you may still feel fear. You may still grieve what is lost. Survival does not mean emotional invulnerability. It means the loss does not erase your ability to choose what comes next. The jungle does not reward the person who knows exactly what tomorrow will look like. It rewards the person who can still think when tomorrow looks different. Become that person. Build for change before change forces you to build. Change is easier when you treat identity as a process instead of a possession. You are not required to remain the same person simply because consistency feels safe. Growth often looks like contradiction from the outside. The cautious person becomes an entrepreneur. The employee becomes a founder. The quiet person learns to speak publicly. The person who once needed approval learns to tolerate disapproval. What matters is not whether change feels strange. It is whether it is aligned with reality and your deeper values. You can become different without becoming unrecognizable. In fact, sometimes the most authentic version of you appears only after the environment forces an update. Build for change by practicing small updates before large ones become necessary. Learn something unfamiliar. Talk to people outside your field. Test assumptions. Review your plans. Keep a little room for surprise. The person who regularly updates their map is less shocked when the road moves. The jungle will change without asking your permission. Your advantage is not control over the landscape. It is the ability to keep your footing while the landscape changes. Survival is not the same as endurance. Sometimes surviving change means changing direction completely. The ability to start again is as important as the ability to keep going. The final advantage is psychological. Once you know you can adapt, uncertainty loses some of its power. You may not know what happens next, but you trust your ability to meet it. Imagine losing a role you thought defined you. The first shock is often identity. Who am I now? If you have built only one version of yourself, change feels like disappearance. If you have developed skills, relationships, interests, habits and values that travel with you, the transition still hurts, but does not erase your identity. This is why resilience should be built before the crisis. You are not trying to become immune to loss. You are building enough internal structure to remain a person when the external structure changes. The Human Jungle in 5th Manual. You now have 30 rules, but rules become useful only when they change behavior. The easiest mistake is to read a book like this, nod at every page, and then return to life exactly as before. Knowledge can create the illusion of progress because understanding an idea feels like practicing it. The real test is what you do the next time a situation asks you to choose between comfort and clarity. The first skill is observation. Before interpreting a person, a workplace, a relationship, or an opportunity, describe what is actually happening. Strip away adjectives for a moment. Instead of "my manager does not respect me," write 3 deadlines changed without warning and I was blamed for 2 of them. Instead of "this person is toxic," write "they repeatedly ignore my boundaries and become hostile when I say no." Specificity matters because vague judgments create vague strategies. The second skill is separating facts, interpretations, and predictions. A fact is something you can reasonably observe or verify. An interpretation is the meaning you assign to it. A prediction is what you think will happen next. People often confuse all 3. A delayed message becomes "they are angry," which becomes "the relationship is ending." A market decline becomes "the market is broken," which becomes "I should sell everything." Once you separate the layers, you can question each one. The third skill is learning to identify leverage. Ask what actually changes the situation. More effort is not always the answer. Sometimes the missing ingredient is information. Sometimes it is a better skill. Sometimes it is a different person in the room. Sometimes it is an alternative source of income. Sometimes it is a boundary. Sometimes it is simply time. Leverage is the factor that makes the same amount of energy produce a different result. The fourth skill is noticing dependence. Look at your life and identify the places where one failure would have an unusually large impact. If one client disappears, what happens? If one relationship ends, who do you have? If one platform changes its rules, can people still find your work? If your current employer ended your role tomorrow, how long could you operate? These are not questions designed to frighten you. They are maps of vulnerability. The fifth skill is learning to stay calm when someone else wants you to hurry. A rushed person is easier to persuade because the need for relief competes with the need for accuracy. You can interrupt that dynamic with a simple sentence. "I need time to think about this." Practice saying it when the stakes are low, so it is available when the stakes are high. The sixth skill is studying your own patterns. What kinds of people do you trust too quickly? What kinds of criticism destabilize you? Where do you say yes automatically? Which opportunities consistently distract you? Which decisions do you repeat even when the outcomes are poor? Self-knowledge is not a list of personality adjectives. It is a map of predictable behavior. The seventh skill is building recovery capacity. You will make mistakes. The strongest people are not the people who never fall into traps. They are the people who do not turn one mistake into a permanent identity. After a bad decision, ask what you can salvage, what you need to repair, and what rule you can change so the same error becomes less likely. Finally, remember that strategy without values eventually becomes hollow. You can become very good at reading incentives and still build a life you do not respect. The purpose of these rules is not to make you suspicious, powerful, or untouchable. It is to help you preserve choice, dignity, and clarity while dealing with an imperfect world. 30 days in the jungle. Do not try to practice all 30 rules at once. For the next 30 days, choose one rule each day and look for a real-life example. Day 1 is simple. Notice an unfair outcome without turning it into a judgment about your worth. Day 2. Watch a pattern instead of listening only to a promise. Day 3. Notice where you have given someone more access than their behavior has earned. The exercise is not to become suspicious. It is to become observant. On day 4, write down one thing that triggers envy and translate it into a desire. On day 5, identify one way you can become more useful without simply becoming more available. On day 6, think of what your reputation currently stands for in the minds of people who work with you. Day 7 is for negotiation. Identify one conversation in which you have been making your needs sound smaller than they are. Days 8 through 10 are about boundaries, dependence, and urgency. Notice where your kindness has become an obligation. Identify one dangerous point of dependence and one small alternative you can build. Then pay attention to the next time someone tries to rush you. You do not have to confront the person. Just notice how your thinking changes when the clock is pushed forward. Days 11 through 13 are about portable skills, attention, and signal. Write down the skills you could carry to another industry. Protect one uninterrupted block of attention. Then choose one information source you can ignore, because it creates more emotion than value. This is not about becoming uninformed. It is about becoming selective. Days 14 through 16 ask you to work on emotional decisions, framing, and value. Catch one moment when you want to act from anger or excitement and delay it. Notice how someone frames a problem in a conversation. Then ask what value you create that is difficult to replace. The goal is to see your own leverage more clearly. Days 17 through 19 focus on filters, painful experiences, and your future self. Identify one opportunity you should probably decline. Write the smallest true lesson from one bad experience. Then make one decision that your future self will thank you for, even if your present self receives no reward. Days 20 through 22 ask you to practice deliberate slowness, investigate fear, and examine comparison. Give yourself permission to pause. Turn one fear into specific questions. Then catch one comparison and ask whether it is actually answering a useful question. If it is not, release it. Days 23 through 25 are about money, intimacy, and leaving. Look at how money is affecting your freedom. Notice whether access is being mistaken for closeness. Then identify one situation in which you may be staying because leaving feels embarrassing or expensive. You do not have to leave that day. You only need to become honest about the cost of staying. Days 26 through 28 focus on quiet power, incentives, and adaptation. Choose one private capability to strengthen. Examine the reward structure around a behavior you dislike. Then identify one part of your life where you need to change tactics without changing your principles. Days 29 and 30 are about conflict and change. Decide which conflict deserves your attention and which one can be allowed to die. Finally, write down what you would still have if your current job, role, platform, or identity disappeared. The list is your resilience portfolio. 30 days will not turn you into a different person. They will make your patterns easier to see. That is enough. Once you can see the pattern, you can change the system around it. The questions that keep you awake in a good way. When a book like this is useful, it does not give you answers to carry forever. It gives you better questions. Before trusting someone, ask what they do when it costs them something. Before accepting an opportunity, ask what it prevents you from doing. Before a major purchase, ask whether you want the object or the feeling attached to the object. Before a conflict, ask what outcome you actually want. Ask what you are depending on. Ask what would happen if it disappeared. Ask whether your current behavior is building options or consuming them. Ask which skills remain useful if the environment changes. Ask whether your calendar reflects your stated values. Ask whether your attention is being chosen by you or rented by whoever can interrupt you most effectively. When someone pressures you, ask what they gain from your speed. When someone praises you, ask whether the praise contains useful information or simply reinforces an identity you enjoy. When someone criticizes you, ask whether there is a piece of truth hiding inside a delivery you dislike. You do not have to accept every judgment in order to extract information from it. Ask yourself what you are avoiding by staying busy. Ask what decision would become easier if you had another option. Ask what emotion has been asking for action without providing evidence. Ask which story you keep telling about your life, because changing the story would require admitting that something important has changed. Ask what your future self will inherit from your current defaults. Ask whether the person you are becoming would feel free inside the life you are building. Ask whether your definition of success still belongs to you or was borrowed from people you were trying to impress. You do not need to answer these questions perfectly. The purpose is to keep your inner conversation alive. A good question creates a pause. A pause creates choice. Choice is where change begins. A final test. What do you do when the rules collide? Life rarely presents one rule at a time. The difficult situations are the ones where two useful principles seem to point in different directions. You may need to be kind and set a boundary. You may need to adapt without becoming someone you do not respect. You may need to negotiate while knowing the other person has more power. You may need to leave while still loving the people involved. Real judgment begins when rules collide. Suppose a person you care about repeatedly breaks an agreement. Rule 2 tells you to trust patterns over promises. Rule 8 reminds you that kindness is not permission. But another part of you remembers their difficulties and does not want to become cold. The answer is not to choose between compassion and boundaries, as if only one can exist. You can understand the reason and still refuse the behavior. You can help without continuing the arrangement that causes harm. Maturity often lives inside that sentence. I understand, and my answer is still no. Now imagine a career decision. A new opportunity offers much more money, but it would make you dependent on one client and consume the attention you need for a longer-term project. Rule 9 warns about dependence. Rule 17 warns against chasing every opportunity. Rule 26 reminds you to build quiet power. The decision cannot be solved by maximizing one variable. You have to ask which arrangement gives your future self more freedom. Not merely which one produces the largest immediate reward. Another conflict appears between speed and slowness. Sometimes you must decide quickly. Sometimes waiting creates the real danger. The answer is to distinguish urgency from importance. A genuine emergency needs action. A manufactured deadline needs skepticism. A decision can also be time-sensitive without requiring an emotional response. Your objective is not to move slowly. It is to move at the speed the situation actually deserves. This is why the rules are better understood as a map than a machine. You do not put a situation into one box and receive an automatic answer. You read the environment, identify the pressures, notice the trade-offs, and then choose. The more complicated the situation, the more important it becomes to think in tensions rather than slogans. You may also discover that one rule protects another. Portable skills support independence. Independence improves negotiation. Better negotiation protects boundaries. Boundaries protect attention. Protected attention makes learning easier. Learning creates skills. Skills create options. Options reduce dependence. What looks like 30 separate ideas is actually a system of reinforcing strengths. This system also explains why small changes matter. You do not need to reinvent your life overnight. Build one option. Say one honest no. Spend 1 hour learning a portable skill. Record one decision before the outcome. Have one conversation without rushing to win it. Each action strengthens a part of the system. When you fail, return to observation. Ask which rule you ignored, which rule you overused, and what new evidence has appeared. Perhaps you stayed too long. Perhaps you left too soon. Perhaps you trusted too quickly. Perhaps you distrusted a good person, because one bad experience had trained you to see danger everywhere. There is no shame in discovering that a rule was applied poorly. The shame would be refusing to learn from the evidence. And remember the moral center. The goal is not to become better at exploiting other people's weaknesses. Anyone can become more manipulative by learning where others are vulnerable. The harder achievement is to become harder to manipulate while becoming safer for other people to trust. That means your power should create options, not cages. Your boundaries should create clarity, not punishment. Your ambition should create contribution, not contempt. In the end, the human jungle is not simply a place where you need to survive other people. It is a place where you need to survive your own blind spots. Pride can make you stay. Fear can make you run. Envy can make you chase. Urgency can make you sign. Loneliness can make you trust too quickly. Status can make you abandon your values. The strongest traveler learns to notice these internal pressures before they become external consequences. That is the real meaning of becoming difficult to manipulate. You do not become suspicious of everyone. You become familiar with yourself. You know the situations in which your judgment tends to collapse. You know the emotions that make you overreact. You know the kinds of rewards that make you trade long-term freedom for short-term approval. You build safeguards in advance. If you remember nothing else from this book, remember this. When reality becomes complicated, return to observation, options, boundaries, and time. Observe what is actually happening. Build options wherever you can. Protect the boundaries that keep your life sustainable. Buy time when urgency is emotional rather than real. These 4 habits will not solve every problem. They will improve the quality of the person solving it. You do not need to win every room. You need to remain able to choose your next move. That is enough power for a lifetime. Conclusion: become the traveler. You have reached the end of the rules, but the real work begins outside the page. The human jungle is not a place you conquer once. It is a reality you learn to navigate repeatedly. You will still meet people who disappoint you. You will still make decisions too quickly. You will still compare yourself with someone you know almost nothing about. You will still remain in a situation longer than you should. You will still feel fear, envy, anger, uncertainty, and ambition. The goal is not to eliminate those experiences. The goal is to become the person who can experience them without handing them the steering wheel. You can stay kind and become harder to exploit. You can become ambitious without becoming consumed by status. You can negotiate without becoming aggressive. You can set boundaries without becoming cruel. You can leave without turning every ending into a war. That is what the rules were trying to teach you beneath the slogans. Protect your ability to choose, build options, notice patterns, guard your attention, read incentives, slow down when pressure rises, learn skills that travel. Stop asking the world to guarantee the outcomes you want. And remember that the future belongs partly to the person you are building now. The jungle is harsh in some places and generous in others. It is full of people who will help you and people who will use you. It contains luck you did not earn and consequences you did not expect. You cannot control all of it, but you can choose how awake you are while moving through it. Become the traveler who observes before reacting, learns before boasting, prepares before panicking, and leaves when staying becomes more expensive than moving on. You do not need to become fearless. You need to become capable. And you do not need to become hard to survive a hard world. You need to become clear. Personal code for the human jungle. I will not confuse fairness with certainty. I will judge patterns more than promises. I will let trust grow in layers. I will use envy as information rather than instruction. I will build value before demanding status. I will treat reputation as something I write through repeated behavior. I will negotiate without apologizing for having needs. I will remain kind without making myself endlessly available. I will reduce dangerous dependence and build options. I will not let borrowed urgency make my decisions. I will build skills that remain useful when circumstances change. I will protect my attention as carefully as my money. I will distinguish signal from noise. I will let intense emotions speak without letting them make permanent choices. I will examine the frame before arguing inside it. I will become distinctively useful rather than merely convenient. I will use filters so opportunity does not become distraction. I will learn from painful experiences without turning them into worldviews. I will make decisions that respect the person I will become. I will give myself permission to think before I answer. I will investigate fear before obeying it. I will stop using comparison as a measure of worth. I will use money to build options, not to manufacture identity. I will remember that access is not intimacy. I will practice leaving when the evidence says staying is no longer wise. I will build quiet power rather than perform strength. I will read incentives as well as words. I will adapt without surrendering my core values. I will choose conflict selectively. I will build a life that can survive change. A closing letter to the reader. If you have stayed with this book to the end, you have probably noticed that none of the rules promises an easy life. That is deliberate. The point was never to create a fantasy in which you become so psychologically skilled that nobody can surprise, disappoint, compete with, or manipulate you. No such version of adulthood exists. What you can build is something quieter and more useful. A mind that notices earlier, a life with more options, and a character that does not collapse when circumstances stop cooperating. You can become the person who pauses before answering, verifies before trusting, negotiates before accepting, and leaves before resentment becomes identity. You may also have noticed that several rules ask you to do something that feels paradoxical. Protect yourself without becoming closed. Build power without becoming controlling. Become useful without allowing yourself to be used. Learn from comparison without becoming possessed by it. Adapt without losing your values. Leave without turning every ending into revenge. Those tensions are not problems to eliminate. They are part of being an adult in a complicated world. The mature answer is often not one extreme or the other. It is a calibrated response that changes with context while remaining anchored by values. You will probably forget some of the wording in this book. That is fine. What matters is whether one or two ideas return to you at the exact moment they are needed. Maybe you are about to accept a deal because someone created false urgency. Maybe you are about to trust a promise while ignoring a pattern. Maybe you are about to say yes because saying no feels uncomfortable. Maybe you are about to leave because you are angry and need the relief of action. In those moments, you do not need a lecture. You need a pause. You need a question. You need enough internal space to remember that an emotion is not an instruction. A promise is not a pattern. Access is not intimacy. Attention is not free. And dependence is not the same thing as connection. That is what these rules are for. They are reminders that return when the situation becomes fast, emotional, or confusing. They are small tools for buying back choice, and perhaps that is the most practical definition of success in a harsh world. Success is not making sure nothing bad happens. It is becoming capable enough that bad things do not automatically decide who you become afterward. Keep your curiosity, keep your kindness, keep your ambition, but keep your boundaries too. Let experience make you wiser without allowing it to make you smaller. There will always be another room to enter, another negotiation to have, another person to understand, another risk to evaluate, and another version of yourself waiting to be built. You will never finish learning the jungle. You only need to become a better traveler.